Hey guys and welcome back to my channel. This is part 2 of What If Naruto Was an Elden Ring. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. Blade had blundered. It was a particularly bad blunder at that, one he really sued. You see, he'd lingered a tad too long in Raya Lucaria. Not his fault, really, it wasn't. He'd wanted to make certain Godric was dead. That and the blonde bastard was alright. He'd fought hard, real hard, and he was almost certain he'd gone and gained a great rune from it, even if the gaining of said rune had knocked him right out. So like any good friend, he'd turned him over onto his back. Nothing untoward, just enough to make sure he didn't wind up drowning in the shallow waters of the bay. Unfortunately, in doing so, he'd glimpsed the other great runes glowing on the boy's back. He'd contemplated telling Ranni of this latest discovery, before the moon descended and everything went sideways. Which brought Blade to the here and now, the present moment in which he found himself staring down an angry Carrion Queen. So yes, blunders. Many had he made. Why, hello dear, Blade. Rennala smiled thinly as she hoisted Naruto's unconscious form into her arms. How kind of you to visit after all these years after I thought thee dead. So kind indeed. Blade certainly didn't seem to think so. Right then, he edged back from her dangerous smile. I'll just be on my way. Let's pretend you didn't see me. Her staff slammed into the wall ahead of him with an ear-splitting frack, splintering the mortal to bar his passage. Not. He raised his hands, keeping them well away from his sword. Suppose I'm in for it, aren't I? Yes. Ranni's conjured another spell with 2 fingers. Yes, you are. Would you kindly sit? An unseen weight hit Blade's body from above, causing his knees to buckle. He crashed face-first into the ground and was knocked right out. 0.0.0.0. Are you awake? Well, would you look at that? He was. Not a stabbing pain or a sudden start by any means. One moment Naruto was resting comfortably on something quite soft. In the next light he heard a faint melody, the sound of someone humming in the dark. Light hit his eyes and he opened them. A quick blink served to orient himself as he looked up, frowned, and found himself staring at. Please remain still. A familiar voice hummed. You are safe. Those who would do you harm are far from here, and the rest have been slain at our hands. Rennala. Yes, she smiled down at him, idly stroking his forehead with one palm. Why is my head in your lap? Because I placed it there, she admitted frankly. I see. He tried to nod, winced now when his neck protested the sudden movement. And why did you do that? To make you comfortable, of course. Her brow furrowed in faint concern. Do you not wish to be? Ouch, you could weaponize a pout like that. Maybe he didn't need to move just yet. She dipped her head down and kissed his nose. Little more than a peck really, but he felt his face warm up all the same. Not satisfied, she lingered, kissing his cheek now, followed by his lips, mouth moving sweetly against his. By the log, he'd never get used to that. Wanting someone to have and hold nice and all, but it was these little day-to-day gestures that made his heart race. This is kinda nice, actually. She leaned back, humming in appreciation. How do you feel? Fair question. Kurama garbled an angry string of gibberish in his head that summed things up quietly nicely. Sore, he said at last. Feels like I got hit by a truck. She blinked. What, pray tell, is a truck? Right, she didn't know what those were. I'll explain later. I should hope so. The queen tutted, tweaking his ear. Dear Blade has told me what transpired. You have gained another great rune. Blade. He tried to rise, only to wince. Where is he? He all right. He is convalescing comfortably in another room. Her smile was a touch strained. Worry not, she amended at his worried look, he is in good health. He simply wished to leave. I would not allow it, not with his injuries. You may visit him at your leisure. Had Blade gotten hurt helping him out? He couldn't remember. And what was this about a great rune? His memory proved slow to recall at first. Finally, it came to him. Yeah, I remember the damn thing ducking under my arm and hitting me. He lifted his shirt to get a better look at it. Right here. Sure enough, there it was, dead center in his chest, glimmering faintly, beating in time with his heart. Well, at least it doesn't hurt. He lowered his shirt with sigh, and heard Rennala make a noise of disappointment. He quirked a brow at her. Were you staring? The faintest hint of pink dusted her pale cheeks, but her smile didn't waver. I was not. He grinned, pleased to have caught her looking. Pretty sure you were. I was not. Her smile didn't waver. In any case, A quick cough railroaded him before he could needle her further. There is another matter I wished to bring to your attention, but it can wait if you wish to rest. Mother. Little Millicent came skidding around the corner, slipped, and fell flat on her face at their feet. She's awake. Come quickly. Never mind that. Rennala preened, all worries forgotten. You called me mother. Millicent froze, face gone redder than her hair. Her moment of hesitation cost her most dear. In an instant Rennala swept an arm down to scoop her up, planting her beside them. What? Naruto chuckled under his breath. Did we adopt another kid while I was out? Rennala's pivoted toward him, expression quite quizzical. How did you know? His face fell into a deadpan to surpass all deadpans. You're kidding me. 0.0.0.0. Rennala wasn't kidding. In short order he found himself stood beside her before a large door. Frustrated noises came within, masked by girlish giggles. Familiar giggles. He laid an ear against the heavy oak frame and was rewarded with another laugh, giddy and free. The ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He heard an angry, raised voice, to which she only giggled all the more. Mel, got in there, didn't she? She most certainly did. Rennala touched one hand to her cheek with a sigh. We tried to keep the newcomer isolated, but as you can see that failed the moment Melina leaned of her existence. She's been keeping her distracted ever since, bless her little heart. Millicent squirmed against her side, quietly curious. And it would seem our second daughter is curious to meet her as well. The little redhead squeaked softly and clutched at her robe. Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. He swung the door open and found himself staring at an older-eyed lass, somewhat older than Melina or Millicent, wearing a fearsome scowl and long dark hair besides, the latter of which was even now being bound back into a flowing ponytail by Melina herself. Also pigtails, a great many pigtails, none of which she looked pleased about. Papa, Melina turned a gormless grin on him. Look, I found another one. Can we keep her, please? Whomever you are, kill me. The new girl turned a pleading look upon him. Right, now, I beg of thee. Naruto looked back to Rennala, wholly at a loss. Who is this sassy lost child? I know not. He caught the hint of something in her voice, just then. She was found sleeping in the library by Moongram. He found her wrapped in a pile of robes. Curious, is it not? The girl twitched. Definitely something going on here. What was the saying? 2 was company, 3 was a crowd. It really didn't feel like that, here. He was more concerned about the where as to the why. Had that damn golden voice dropped another kid in his lap just to spite him? Why is this place a magnet for lost children? He flung up his arms. Is there something in the water? You must decide what to do with her. He rounded on Rennala, utterly incredulous. Why me? She flushed. Because my judgment is admittedly skewed in the matter. Skewed, she said. Ha, that was putting it mildly. Rennala's love for children was unsurpassed. Even if there was something odd about this one, he could sense her intentions well enough. 3 was but a number to her and a small one at that. She'd raised a trio of her own after all. Why would she balk at raising a gaggle of girls? A wild, incredulous part of him wondered just how high that number would climb. 5, 7, dare he say 9, just thinking about it threatened to make his head spin. I guess we'll keep her. Unable to bear Rennala's stare he finally looked away, scratching the back of his head. Doesn't feel right to just turn her out of the academy. Lovely, her face said it all, he'd walked right into her trap. Do you hear that, girls? Melina summed it up nicely. New sister Tilda. Millicent groaned into her hands. This is my life now, isn't it? Didn't stop her from peeking through her fingers at the newcomer, though. You don't mind, do you? Naruto turned to face the girl, wanting her opinion in all this. I mean, it doesn't look like you've got anywhere to go, don't suppose you've got a name. He expected some manner of anger, protest at the very least. None came, not a word, not a tantrum, not a jot. Beneath their expectant gazes, the newcomer fidgeted restlessly, staring at her toes. As they looked on, her face turned positively pink. Selin, if it pleases you. Melina jumped onto her back and held tight with a giggle. Hello, Sel. Say my name properly you little urcho, what's the use? Naruto patted her head, she flushed deeper still. Welcome to the family, Selin. 0.0.0.0. Well, this was humiliating. Somewhere in Selin's grand plan she hadn't accounted for this, being bounced on Rennala's knee like the child she now was. What made it worse was that she'd retained most of her faculties. Oh yes, she was well aware of her plight, and the spectacular blunder she'd made. For the life of her she didn't know how to get out of this, nay, if it was even possible. Preserving her cover was paramount. The blonde man scary might not suspect her, but she was almost certain someone would, and if they did. I know who thou art. Selene stiffened as Rennala whispered in her ear. And I must say, I'm rather enjoying thy comeuppance. The Carrion Queen hummed, rubbing the small of her back. Didst thou think to fool me? Her mouth opened and closed like a guppy. Rennala preened. There's the Selene I know, so sure she knows more than her teachers, so surprised when they prove her wrong. Why the facade then? Of this, childish bliss. Selene grumbled. Thou art a brat, Selene, but one I am proud of. Consider this, a century's comeuppance for being a bad student. I'd rather you throw me to the wolf. Oh, he'll be joining us for the family painting, though thou shalt sit upon thy father's lap instead. The angry pout that followed was the stuff of legends. Blast it all, this was her life now, wasn't it? In the cloying darkness at the heart of the Erd tree, Queen Marika stapled her fingers in thought. Well, not truly. After all, the arms of her corporeal form were currently splayed well above her, each delicate wrist's porcelain flesh held fast to the semicircular arc of penitent auric light. It was both a literal prison and a metaphorical punishment, a crucifixion of stellar proportions. She could thrash and writhe all she wanted, muster the totality of her power along with what remained of the Elden Ring, and it would do her no good. At most it could trigger some cataclysmic earthquake in Lindell, perhaps even a continent-spanning storm, but neither would change her situation. She was not getting out, not under her own power. After all, this coronal crucifix was her own power turned against her, twisted by that blasted and besotted greater will that she scorned with every passing second. But unlike the eons that had passed, Marika the Eternal had something besides the withering rebuke of her brother self to keep her mind off the agony and anger. Papa, are you feeling better? Spoke a cherubim's voice in her ear, a tiny twinkle in this God's forsaken prison. Of course I'm feeling better. Rennala had me patched up in a jiffy. Still got a twinge in the chest from that cannon-looking bugger, but he's gone now, so we'll call it even, Anyway, I'm just glad you three are behaving yourselves. The beast, no, Naruto replied. Marika felt a tickle of that most human childish joy run down along her link with her offshoot. It was a curious feeling, not unlike what she had shared with Radagon but different, more like hearing someone in the next room over than the echoes of a conch shell. Canonin, whatever could that be, some form of foreign deity or perhaps an alabaster lord? Marika heard, the newest voice much more mature in intonation but still the squeak of a very young girl. Through Melina's eye, the goddess watched the whiskers on Naruto's face bunch up in thought before the visage shifted to little Selene, perched on a small but plush blue cushion at his feet. How do I put this? I never was big on religion, but I visited the fire temple once. Canonin was the bodhisattva of compassion, she had 10,000 arms. Alto the old man first's Canonin was a damn sight better looking than Godric's moldy ass. The vision shifted up and down slightly, a nod Marika realized, Melina was nodding in affirmation of her father's words. Perhaps it was a trick of the shifting light above her, or did she feel her cracked lips tweak upwards at the comment? She watched Selene tap a slightly pudgy finger to her lips while the other hand tapped a bare foot. And what, pray tell, dear father? Naruto choked on this air. U.R.K. Is a bodhisattva, the little black-haired girl asked, her eyes full of keen intelligence. Oh, what an interesting little bundle of brilliance and hubris she was, Marika thought. She would have made a fine court mage once grown to age, perhaps even a ward. Oh sweet log, please keep these religious questions to a minimum, Selene. The remote viewing deity had to give credit to Selene's pout, it truly was a legendary thing. As far as I know, to become a Buddha is to divorce themselves of all worldly desires and transcend existence. A bodhisattva is someone who has earned the right to become a Buddha, but chooses to not become one yet so they can stay behind and help others. Marika allowed herself to tune out the stream of consciousness for a moment as she ruminated on the blonde's words. To transcend existence but choose to remain some connection to the material realm in order to guide others, she could not help but see some of that in what she had planned for the lands between had her plans not been so utterly gelded by a combination of factors, much of which were her own fault. If she were to visit the errant Elden beast's home, would she be regarded as a bodhisattva of grace? Her face soured when Radagon spoke tersely from deep within her. Don't be so lofty, Marika. You are a sinner, once who stepped from the Golden Order to court a world outside of the plan. You are and will always be a heretic, but your choice to forestall the order of things was to spit in the face of our God, not for the sake of helping the common masses. Gold eyes blazed with anger, the pain of the thorn embedded in her side thumping terribly. Curb thine sanctimonious tongue, brother self. She clicked her tongue as she heard him scoff. We share a soul and I will not have you belittle my choices. Why don't you go back to doing what you always do, sulk in the back of my mind and mutter apologies to the God that abandoned you? Her words peaked into a shout near the end, her voice echoing in the dark hollow. Radagon's mental presence retreated a jot before standing firm. She had always been able to cow him into submission when they were two separate bodies, but sharing one vessel made it harder to send him away when he wasn't wanted. Long ago, this would present a boring cycle of what was essentially a vitriolic lover's spat with no end, and the only interruption she had to the utter boredom of her captivity. Until recently, that is, while Marika's ability to speak with Melina was confined almost exclusively to her dreams. As time passed, she had found the rather handy ability to look through the eye of her daughter, to observe the lands between and the foreign Elden beast, or Naruto as she had come to know him by. While initially the practice had been motivated purely by the desire to know what her odd prospective replacement was as far away as possible, as days had slid into weeks and months, it had become a mundane form of entertainment. Naruto was odd. He was obviously powerful as befitted an Elden beast, not crafted by the hand of the will. Heresy. Do shut up. But he did not display any of the rampant bestial urge of domination she expected of him. The Elden Ring, despite what the Golden Order might preach, predated the Greater Will's advent upon the lands between, but it still represented the lordship over the fundamental rules of reality in this world. So to see an Elden beast, an incarnation of dominion over the laws of reality so utterly relaxed, had left her, in a word, flummoxed. Ergo, she realized that in the grand game being played between herself and the outer god that had her imprisoned here with the most annoying roommate ever, was in a stage of détente. Neither of their forged or acquired pieces was doing what they had initially been bade to, but in their interaction the game was at a pause while Naruto and Melina seemed to be enjoying their little slice of homely bliss in the bosom of Liurnia. While the will may seethe in the heavens, Marika was okay with this situation for now. For the time being she would watch this, observe everything she could for days, weeks, months, perhaps years, and when she knew all the constants and variables. Then the father of all shall meet the mother of the world, she whispered, content. It will not last, Radagon bit out, the greater will is eternal, it is as ever-turning as day and night, and you know that it shall try again. Snorting in derision at her brother self, a decidedly unladylike act, Marika lamented she could not call her hammer to smack him upside the head. And it will be met with failure again and again. I know not what it schemed with twisting Godric, but that black blade in the beast's hands seemed to scupper it. Her words did not portray the utter horror she had experienced upon first witnessing Naruto's blade through Melina's eyes. It stung her eyes in that cold way that only destined death could, but she knew it could not be the true destined death. No, that lay sequestered away safely with Makiketh, but still, death by any other name was still an end, and in the hands of Naruto it had brought an end to Godric's pitiful existence. Radagon bridled, another world's death, a heretical object wielded by a beast gone astray, fitting as it is repugnantha. He broke off, the sharp intake of breath all but metaphysical in this quasi-space. Fine golden brows knit together in a line, she swept her mental gaze about to see what had rendered the usually vocal Radagon to silence and did not have to look for long. Through Melina's eyes, Marika stared into the familiar form of Renola walking into the drawing room that Naruto, Selen and Melina occupied. For a shadow of an instant, Marika could not help a shot of envy to prickle at the base of her soul. The full moon queen of Caria had regained much of her splendor as of late. To someone who had spent the last few eons in the same tattered black chitin, it stung her womanly sensibilities to know that the woman who was once her rival now looked so. In love, Radagon exclaimed, his voice lacking its normal religious zeal, yet in the soul they shared, Marika was rocked by the tempestuous thunder of emotions that thundered from her other half like a crumbling dam, failing to hold back a tide. Renola. Marika paused, introspectively, gazing at her brother self, feeling the bittersweet melancholy that crossed into her mind when he saw Naruto walk into sight. She watched, observing how the tall Carrion queen and this Elden outlander interacted. The relaxed refinement and bell-like laughter that Renola exuded, the banal invictus of a courting couple's day. Looking down into the mist-filled depths beneath her, her eyes sliding closed while the stream of consciousness continued to play before her mind. She had some regrets in her life, and while stealing Radagon away from Renola had not been one of them, What was this bittersweet sorrow in her shared soul if not regret for making her brother do something he regretted? "Does it hurt you, Radagon?" she asked, her voice for once carrying none of the righteous fury, instead an earnest empathy, to see her court another. Radagon did not reply, continuing to watch his ex-wife hand Millicent to Naruto as Melina clambered onto his shoulders like a spider monkey. When the duo linked arms and dragged a grumbling Selen along with them, Mariko was surprised to feel Radagon retreat from her mind, his mighty fire dimming to a small but genuine ember. "I just want her to be happy." 7 words, and Marika the Eternal was rendered silent. 0.0.0.0. The greater will was many things. Alas, it was also very much a sore loser in, just about everything, rally. One was clearly not enough. Against one the beast had endured. Now, it would be overwhelmed. Direct intervention is necessary, it concluded in its infinite finite wisdom. And so it acted, not once, not twice, nor thrice, nay, it recruited more. Undermine and distract, subvert and destroy. Pawns within many pawns. Plots within plots. 0.0.0.0. Old loyalties tugged at Loretta. "I could help you, child. I can save them, all of them. You have but to let me in." She touched a hand to her helm, waking from her mid-morning nap. Had she heard a voice just now? Nay, surely not. 0.0.0.0. Malenia dreamed. Perhaps dream wasn't the right word. Dreaming implied happiness. She felt no such happiness in these dreams. These were nightmares. These dark specters were both her past, her present, her future. She saw her every mistake, her every misdeed laid out for her in startling clarity. All of it, her ever fumble, her every flaw. Mother, Michaela, Kaled, her search, her endless search as she destroyed all who came near her. Friend or foe, it mattered not. She didn't care for them. She did not dare allow herself to care. And in her callousness, a world was brought to ruin. All fell before her, even her half-brother Radon. Gentle Radon who once taught her swordplay when no one else would go near her. Noble Radon, who sought to guide her on her perilous path, only to be forced to take up arms against her. Noble Radon, who in his infinite mercy did not finish her off when he should and instead let her stand once more. Rotten Radon, whom she furiously blighted in a fit of childish spite, blooming upon her defeat. Vengeful Radon, whose voice haunted her nightmares now. "You are a plague." She recoiled. "Stop. Everything you touch rots. Please, stop. You have soiled the lands between. Someone make it stop." Golden light cut through the darkness of her dreams. "How far you have fallen, little child of Radagon. Woe betide thee." With wakefulness came loneliness, and with it, bitter realization. Malenia still possessed some small semblance of her wits. Just enough to know what this was. Enough to resist. "I serve only one." She sat up in her chair and scowled through sightless eyes. The laconic reply, "And you are not him. Begone, pretender. I have no need of you. You serve no one, fool. You pine for one who cares not for you, a life that is no longer yours, a rotten shell of your former self." She refused to believe such, for to doubt meant death. Lies. "What say you to a trade, then? You would barter with one such as me." A low chuckle pervaded the dry air. "How desperate you are. Then I shall show you." The greater will lack teeth to gnash, but it growled at her all the same. "Behold, look upon your brother, your family, see what they have become, see the life you have wasted, waiting for naught. See what you failed to save. Perhaps then you will be willing to accept the gift I offer." Light burned sight into Malenia's sightless eyes. In an instant, she saw it all. And she screamed. 0.0.0.0. Naruto found himself feeling incredibly relaxed. For the first few moments after his awakening he couldn't quite place why. Slowly opening his eyes he found himself looking up at the wooden edifice of a 4-poster bed, the inner side of its dark wood canopy carved with the intricate lines of constellations and stellar movements in faded but still pretty silver filigree. He was surrounded by a pleasant liquid coolness of dark silk sheets that pooled around his body like dark water, but there was also a warmth he couldn't place. The sound of soft, gentle breathing caused his ears to perk up and take stock of his other senses. So that's why. A small smile adorning his face when he found a cascade of glossy black hair tickling his shoulder. Renala slept softly in the mid-morning light, her tall, graceful body adorned in a modest long-sleeved nightgown, arms gently wrapped around his waist as she continued to gently inhale and exhale. Blue eyes regarded the exotic creature nestled against him, slowly reaching out a hand to tuck a stray lock of long black hair behind her ear and likewise feeling a thrill of innocent delight when she turned her face towards his hand, seeking its warmth. This was a nice change of pace. While still somewhat foreign to him, ever since the scuttled assault on the castle, Naruto had taken to sleeping in the same bed as his host, and he could honestly say it was one of the better decisions in his colorful life. They had yet to go quite that far with one another, but the mundane intimacy of being able to sleep cuddled up to someone who you were slowly blooming feelings for was a delight to wake up to. Still, comfortable as he was, he knew they couldn't laze out about forever. Time to wake up, he said with a smile. Much as I would love to lounge here all day in bed, I think the girls might lead a revolt against Boggart and Moongram if we leave them alone for too long. I suppose they would, wouldn't they? Groaning in discontent, Renala's eyelids fluttered open and met Naruto's gaze. Purely on reflex she leaned up and planted a small kiss on his cheek, one he reciprocated. Wouldst that be such a travesty? I can't think of much better than making sure this silk is kept warm and you have quickly become my favorite heating element. Her narrow face took on an impish amusement even as she yawned. Naruto scoffed, did you just call me a hot water bottle? Perhaps, Renala replied humorously, giggling when he lightly flicked her nose. It feels strange to want to just enjoy mundane life after so long. Is it wrong for me to want to keep thee close at hand at all times? Fatal blow. Naruto felt his face warm. So long as you're not keeping me in a cage, I think we'll be just fine. He sat up, propping himself up in bed on the plush pillows. He didn't miss the way her gaze tracked him like a hawk, sweeping across his bare chest, fascinated at the intricate runes carved into the flesh. Pushing herself up to sit beside him, Renala snapped her fingers. A flagon of water and a pair of crystal goblets were summoned to them from a distant desk, pouring the pair of them a morning draught to rid them of the dryness of mouth that only sleep could bring. Do you have anything planned today? She asked, still looking for a reason to stay in bed with her paramour-to-be. Running a hand through his hair, Naruto frowned thoughtfully. Well, I do have something in mind, sort of a display for the girls to have some fun. I've got some clones working on the fireworks since last night. Renala blinked. What is a firework? Now it was his grin that gained an impish quality. Now, who's the one that wanted to stay in bed all day? He received a pillow to the face for that one, but as a playful bout of bedward roughhousing began with throaty giggles from both parties involved, a cavalcade of clones were going about their business. 0.0.0.0. Far away in a well-lit but otherwise normal-looking lecture hall, a group of figures stood around a large mahogany table upon which was arrayed a combination of paper, brushes, inkwells as well as numerous earthenware vessels. They varied in size and shape and contained a variety of materials ranging from nondescript brown powders indistinguishable from soil to petrified leaves frozen in crystal and even a clear beaker that was emitting steam regardless of the fact there was no flame. Naruto sat perched atop a tall stool with one leg crossed over the other, tongue poking from the corner of his mouth in concentration as he slowly ground glintstone to a fine powder in a stone mortar and pestle. Taking a pinch of the blue crystalline powder between his fingers and channeling chakra into his fingertips, he was rewarded by a plume of cyan-colored flame from the substance until it was burnt away. Needs to be more coarse, he muttered to himself before modifying the sealing matrix he was working on. On the other side of the table stood 7 figures all with varying expressions. Boggart tapped the cheek of his iron mask in confusion while Moongram stroked his perfectly kept beard in interest. Behind the two men was the much taller figure of Blade who had taken Millicent onto his shoulders while Melina sat upon the red wolf at his side. Melina squirmed between them, trying to get a better look at the materials. Ooh, pretty. Fascinating, Selen muttered, her childish body propped up on a similar high stool to Naruto, watching the tip of his ink brush dance atop the small ofuda before he sealed some of the powder within it and rolled it into a tight ball. What kind of magic is this, father? She asked, the last word sounding strained, consternation in her childish voice. Naruto smiled sheepishly. I wouldn't really call it magic. Just trying to make a firework is all. A firework. Nodding, Naruto pointed at the growing pile of paper balls slowly filling the container to his left. Yeah, a paper bomb works by putting chakra into paper via a seal, so when it's ignited the chakra fuels the fire in such a short time it creates an explosion. If you seal certain substances to burn inside of those tags, then when they burn, the substances burn as well, changing the nature and appearance of the explosion. Selen surmised, looking decidedly smug when Naruto reached over to pat her on the head. Boggart leaned over to Moongram, One sphere of runes says that blonde bastard somehow attracts another kid if he doesn't blow himself up. That's a fool's bet. Mongram rolled his eyes. Deal. Blade watched the exchange with interest and amusement. To think that so much effort would be put in for the sake of a few colorful explosions, but then again the blonde fellow was a strange one himself. When he had awoken pinned to the floor of the room he was being kept in by gravity magic that would make General Radon blush, the Wolven Knight and Shadow had concluded that he was probably, well and truly, boned. Rennala had not been best pleased with him and he had seen one of two options ahead. He was either going to be sweated for information on his whereabouts these last few centuries, a prospect that involved a fair bit of magically induced pain on the Carrion Queen's part, or left to rot in that room until Rani got off her petite bottom to come and rescue him. Tough choice. Alas, the currently crafting blonde had proven to be a remarkable panacea to the ire of his ward's mother, positively a lifesaver Eve. He had been allowed to leave the room and explore the academy grounds relatively unmolested with the verbal confirmation that when he felt like it, he would tell the strange family what they wanted to know. And it was a prospect he was dreading because who knew what would happen to Rennala's touchy mental state if what he knew came to light. Still, Naruto had allotted him a veritable stay of execution to try and work out what to say, and for that he would one day repay. Unless something unprecedented happened, but what were the chances of that? Surely fate wasn't that much of a bitch. 0.0.0.0. Far distant from Liurnia, in the ruins of the now truly abandoned Stormville Castle, a towering figure sat in the shadows. His an imposing figure, massive even when seated on the cracked stone floor, his body wreathed in burlap rags and a gnarled cane leaning against the nearby wall. His face was a frightful thing to behold, lank gray hair betwixt a crown of jagged horns and bloodshot eyes pressed closed in monk-like prayer. Morgoth the Fell Omen prayed. He sat in silence, his repose solemn and faith absolute, a true servant of the Golden Order despite being the second child of the traitorous Eternal. This last year he had taken to a simple but dutiful task, to wait upon the ruins of Stormvale as a beachhead against any foul tarnish that climbed from the muck of obscurity, beating them down before they could even take their first step towards the potential of becoming the Elden Lord, evading the contemptuous gaggle of his grafted kin. But as of late that had changed. Stormvale sat empty, its lord long gone, its knights scattered to with wind and what remained put to the sword by the Fell Omen. It was his place now, and he found it fitting, a ramshackle temple for an omen to pray to its one true God. O greater will that dwells in the heavens, that gifts these lands with gold and order, I am but your humble servant, doing what I can to scupper my traitorous kin's actions, the sins they have wrought. He prayed, his voice serious, faith unshakable. What is thy bidding, O greater will? There is much askew in the lands between, I would know thy plan so it would be done. It was a common prayer for Morgoth, he said it 3 times a day, at sunrise, noon and sunset, perfectly ordered. It had been one of the only things that had kept him sane in the sewers so long ago. Usually he knew there would be no reply, for even in the presence of the fingers where he would be sneered at by the true ordained clergy of the Golden Order, it was usually only in his dreams that he heard the voice of the Golden Will. Fell Omen, born of sin, child of the Whore Eternal, follower of the Golden Order, hearken and attend. Morgoth's eyes snapped open, eyes frantic and looking around before violently throwing himself to the floor, his horns cracking the stone as his face slammed into the masonry, utterly prostrate. O greater will, I am here, I am but an omen but attend I do. A feeling of grand satisfaction washed over Morgoth, a celestial hum ringing in his mind. As you should, my honored servant, the only one to see sense in this world gone wrong. Why do you call to me? He frowned at the question, nose blowing out clouds of dust from the floor he would not raise his head from. I seek guidance, greater will, I feel I should assist in the taming of the beast gone awry, things don't seem to be going to plan. Morgoth was aware of the broad strokes of what his god had done, summoned an Elden beast to the lands between, for reasons he could not fathom, to replace his mother and taketh the Elden ring. Pain lanced through his head, the focus of the will beaming ire directly into his cranium. You doubt my omnipotence to do as I desire. No, Morgoth shook his head, pain ringing in his ears, never, I simply wish to understand so I can better carry out your will. The will paused, caught in thought as it considered the speck of dust that Morgoth was to it. You have long proven yourself a faithful servant, remaining true to the Golden Order and to me long after the rest of your family fell to the idiocy of flesh and personal desires. So rejoice, Morgoth of the Whore's bloodline, for I shall grant you wisdom as to the plan. The gray-haired old man did not verbally respond, instead showing his supplication by pressing his face deeper into the jagged and pummeling stone. The Elden Ring, as you know, is shattered, the rules of this world scattered to the wind. But after so many eons of seeing this world rot, it occurred that the facets of this world are lacking. In my boundless knowledge and power, I crafted 4 new runes for serenity, compassion, healing and life. Then I procured a being from a distant star most aligned with those facets and grafted them to their body and soul, crafting them into an Elden beast to wrench the ring from Marika's meddlesome body. To fix the Elden ring, Morgott questioned, only to receive the mental image of a celestial sneer. To reforge the Elden ring, to make it mine, should the beast obtain the ring, those 4 concepts shall reforge the ring before being burnt out of the very fabric of reality. A ring that dictates a world with no need for serenity, or compassion, no need to heal for life itself shall be obedience to the order, perfect and unchanging forever. This is what I have decreed. Petulance dripped from each word like a plague, base and hubristic. Only an outer god could think up such a dull world in perfect order and think it good. But I miscalculated, underestimating the beast's desire to be banal. I have sought ways to bring it to heal, but with each attempt, it has only grown more bonds that prevent it from doing what I brought it here to do. Morgott's face thinned, devoid of all emotion. Is that why Godric finally met his end? The mendicant lord was a means to an end. He was never meant to win, he was supposed to die. I twisted his greater rune much as I twisted Marika's power to imprison her. He was to die, then my will made manifest would meld with the beast and via that rune, burn out his humanity, replacing it with nothing more than the desire to claim the ring. Sadly, for reasons I cannot fathom, he severed my hold on the anchor rune using his blade of destined death from a foreign land. A most alarming development indeed, but at least the burlap-clad demigod could take solace in knowing that the blackguard of Stormvale had passed on, even if his final job was as much a failure as his life. Then what do you need of your servant? Shall I fall upon the lakes, snuff out their minor flame of ambition before they are emboldened to oppose the order further? The response proved both clipped and terse. No, there are many pieces that must be brought to bear, and from you I need one in particular. Seeketh the knight who dances between glintstone and unalloyed gold. The beast and his blade are not of this world, so perhaps the next piece shall too descend from another world. And with nothing more than a mental shunt, the greater will retreated from Morgott's mind, leaving him alone in the empty stone room. Pushing himself to his feet, the tall omen picked up his cane and swept from the room, stooping to get through the door and brushing pieces of masonry from his rags. He had a mission to attend to, and by the stars above he would see it done. So shall it be. 0.0.0.0. Ranni tilted her head. Tilted it some more, now. More tilting yet. What the devil is going on over there? Peeking out from under the edge of her wide-brimmed hat, the doll-bodied Empyrean felt an aggravated curiosity swaying her from her path. Blade had not returned. Usually such a fact would not concern Ranni a jot. After all, her shadow and confidant was a being of utmost tenacity. While he would not return to her on time, he would always return, and she had held no qualms that should he come to blows with Godric that he would slip away with some minor injury. Alas, in the time that had passed since that frantic call about the late Grafted's assault on the academy, not once had Blade contacted her. Her non-existent heart had stilled a beat at the prospect of his death before discarding it as a foolish notion thought, a silly thought that was consumed by a far more terrifying reality. If Blade had not returned to her and did not speak to her and was indeed still alive, then it was all too likely that her mother had caught him unawares. That was problematic. Ranni's stance on what to do about her mother had been caught in a state of uncharacteristic dithering since she had first learned of her recovery. On the one hand, ecstatic glee at the thought that her beloved mother now lived again, on the other hand, existential dread that she had to face her. But Blade was missing, and needed to be found. Ergo she had split the difference. She dare not approach in the flesh, for fear of being seen or worse. And so instead she sent herself forward in a projection. Taking a purely speculative deep breath, Ranni tottered along the surface of the water, towards the academy walls that she knew so well, her path clear and steps small yet purposeful. The barriers and wards filled her senses with a nostalgic wonder at her mother's arcane brilliance, but that was not what which drew her currently twitching eye. Boom, boom, crackle, fizz. Lights shot into the sky above the castle grounds, trailed by smoke and streaks of sparks. One by one they raced into the heavens before explosively detonating into a burst of brightly colored light. Dozens followed, filling the evening air with a cacophony of noise and light. They were not simply static explosions either, some pirouetted through the air as pinwheels of glintstone while others thundered with lightning as green as the balefire that had spawned it. Creatures from every bestiary of mundane to apocryphal took form from smoke and light, a menagerie of phantasmagoria that seemed to dance in the clear sky, pinpricks of starlight poking through from the cosmos above. The incorporeal Carrion opened her mouth to make a comment, but no sound emerged, until one did. A muted noise of awe. She cursed herself for it, shook her head and silently made her way to the gates, passing inside and beginning her search for Blade. She did not have to search for very long. The main courtyard in front of the primary lecture hall was a far cry from when she had last seen it, dilapidated as it had been. Now the grass looked to be freshly lain and the water fountains clean to a pearlescent shine. "Sending up the next set, any requests?" Naruto said, drawing Rani's gaze, her comically large hat poking out from behind a dark piece of masonry to peek at the mysterious blonde. It was her first time seeing him in the flesh. He was different. She did not think she had ever seen hair that naturally spiky. The blonde outlander was dressed lightly, a dark silk shirt with ruffled cuffs and matching breeches tucked into sandals. In front of him lay a dozen perforated ceramic tubes pointing up at a right angle. "Green dragon, green dragon," Melina squeaked, bouncing up and down on the balls of her feet, her eye all but glowing with juvenile jubilation. Sure enough, her cries were echoed by the others. "One green dragon coming right up," Naruto replied, pulling a dozen tightly packed paper balls from his pocket and quickly dropping them into the perforated ceramic tubes one after another. Rani watched as the perforated ceramic tubes launched the fireworks into the sky with a loud whoosh, leaving behind trails of green smoke that twisted and turned in the air. The sound of the launch reverberated through her chest, and she found herself drawn to the spectacle above her head. As the fireworks exploded into green fire and smoke, it began to twist and lengthen into the roaring maw of an emerald green dragon, swimming through the sky with grace and majesty. However, it looked like no dragon Rani had ever seen, its body long and twisting like a serpent, a long and thin mustache trailing from its nostrils. The children assembled below cheered in delight, and hidden Rani couldn't help but feel a forgotten sense of childish glow wash over her. How very quaint. These weren't weapons after all, but entertainment. Alas, her attention was quickly diverted by the sound of a voice most familiar. "Wonderful," Renala said, her face the same as Rani remembered. Her dress was a rich burgundy velvet adorned with gold embroidery, and her hair was styled in an intricate braid that trailed down her back. Millicent, with her striking gold eyes and fiery red hair, sat in Renala's lap, her tiny hands clasped together in delight. Rani's heart twisted at the sight of her mother. It had been so long. She couldn't ignore the guilt that still gnawed at her insides, knowing that she had played a part in driving Renala to madness. But before she could dwell on those emotions for long, her mother spoke anew. "I must admit it a sublime cantrip," Renala said, admiration in her voice. "How did you make it work?" Naruto shrugged nonchalantly. "It's something similar to what my old friend Sai used to do. I'm crap at drawing, but I'm pretty good with seals." Renala giggled and summoned her catalyst, a slender wand made of shimmering crystal. With a flick of her wrist, she summoned a phantom of a familiar dragon, which soared up to join the green dragon in the sky. The two dragons danced and twisted around each other to the delight of the children. As Rani took a serious scan of the courtyard, her gaze landed on the iron-masked boggart cooking at a stove with Moongram feeding a giant crawfish. They seemed to be enjoying their time, unperturbed by the surrounding commotion. However, her attention shifted to a new child with black hair who was taking notes in a notebook while looking at the display. The child had a familiar air, but Rani couldn't quite place them. "Where is Sweet Blade?" she questioned internally, then a familiar figure emerged from the doors to the main lecture hall. Rani gawked. Blade, tall, grizzled, very rarely if ever seen outside of his armor, was wearing a white silk shirt and carrying a tankard as if he were about to relax on a pleasant summer's evening. Indignant anger burned her cheeks. The knave, she had feared him dead or tortured or worse, and here he was, sitting in his Sunday best as if he were about to enjoy a picnic. That absolute bah. "You lost, little girl." A squeak of surprise fled from her lips. Meep. Rani leapt back, turning on her heel to look up into the face of Naruto who peered down at her curiously. "Ha!" Boggart howled with laughter in the background. "Take that, you dodgy old codger. I win the bet. Told you there'd be more." But when Moongram did not respond, Rani could not stop the feeling of looming dread bearing down on her from on high, like a meteor from heaven itself. Why was it so quiet? "Rani," Blade breathed out, causing Naruto's eyes to narrow to slits. But it was not the suddenly perturbed blonde, the gawking Moongram or anyone else that made Rani's non-existent heart skip a beat. She heard the sound of rustling in the grass as someone set something down gently before getting to their feet. Said someone slowly approaching where Rani remained rooted, paralyzed by fear. How was it that rustling grass could be so horrid? She begged herself to look away, to simply cancel the thought projection she was using and return her stream of consciousness to her puppet body on the distant rise, but she could do nothing as her mother, who looked so much more imposing than she remembered, met her gaze. "Little Culver," Renala whispered, her eyes awash with a myriad of emotions from fathomless love to burning anger. Naruto looked between the two and let out a sigh. Well, this is certainly a development. 0.0.0.0 Upon a realm, far from here, there exists a place, neither empirical nor ethereal. A dream, one foot in reality and the other in the land of dreams. It presides over endless glades of shifting mist, the tang of blood and madness almost covered up by sweet-smelling hollyhocks that grow around the thick trunk of a gnarled tree beneath the large moon. At the foot of the tree sat a man, his face old and drawn, shadowed by lank white hair and an odd hat. The man's chest rose and fell softly and his eyes, withered and old, remained closed, indistinguishable from sleep. But he was not at rest, he never slept, only slipped in and out, lapses in consciousness where he could forget the pain of his miserable captivity, but still there was the ache of an old body, a mocking reminder that while never aging, he was forever old. Above him the moon dimmed, a cloud passing in front of it, a cloud that was not vapor and dream but rather dust and order, one that grew brighter until it was a nebulae of perfectly arrayed golden stars, its presence warming the old man's older bones. He senses its regard, the weight of its gaze, an expectation. "No," he spoke, his voice acrid with age. "Even now, you deny me." "I serve no one," came the laconic reply. "Begone, outer god." It was not the first time the old man had been visited by the nebulae, but he had been here long enough to recognize the ilk of the eldritch fact that this one spoke was a novel difference, but still, he would not serve. "You serve no one, fool. You pine for one who cares not for you, a life that is no longer yours, imprisoned by an outer goddess who cast you aside long ago. It is my sin to bear, a stewardship I despise but carry out all the same. But hate it you do, and I know you wish it to end, to leave this place once and for all." The old man shifted uneasily in his chair, thin fingers steepling in thought. This is a rotten dream, it stinks of blood and madness, I long for freedom, but what is freedom to one who cannot use it? And even if I could leave, another would take my place, and I will not have my final act be damnation on another." The outer god hummed, dispersing the clouds over the glades to peer at this foreign world in morbid interest. The old man tutted in disgust. "What say you a last mission then, soldier courted by the moon?" Glowering at the manifestation, the old man spat sharply. "I am no soldier." "Indeed you are not, you are something far more noble, and thus I appeal to that nobility. There is another in my world, a beast that courts the queen of the moon. A beast that needs freeing of the bondage of civility before it is bound to a path it cannot return from." Against the old man's better judgment, he felt old feelings stir in his heart. Sentiment. "You would barter with me." A low chuckle pervaded the dry air. "How desperate you are. Do not mock me, mortal, I am infinitely your. Get to the bloody point, you contemptuous Ori." The old man's eyes opened flintly, savoring the anger he felt in those golden stars. The greater will grumbled before speaking again. "I offer safe passage from this land, to hunt the Moon Queen and set the beast free of his mind. Live or die, you shall never return to this place, of that you have my word, good hunter." Motes of gilded light swirled downwards to the foot of the tree, spinning and growing thicker until an archway presented itself to the old man. He sat there, in his old wheelchair, contemplating the prospect before him until the gentle shifting of flowers in the wind was broken by a new sound. "Hum-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha," the old man chuckled, bracing his hands against the armrests before pushing himself to his feet. "Dear, oh dear, it has been a while since the prospect of game has motivated me to move. But to leave this place, to save another through blood, to stop another fool from being courted by the moon. A worthy note to end on." With grace that put a dancer to shame, the man gently hefted the long shaft of a scythe onto his back and marched towards the fog door to another world. Tonight, once again, Gehrman joins the hunt. Meep. Were Rani not a doll, her throat would have gone dry. A doubly true statement, given that not only did her doll body lack the ability to produce bodily function, but what stood now in the courtyard of Raya Lucaria was a thought projection, a remote-controlled extension of her senses and spirit to interact with the world while her porcelain form was safely sequestered away at the topmost parapet in her rise. And yet, Despite this, she was beset by degrees of phantom sensation she had long forgotten. The sound of blood thundering in her ears. The feel of sweat beating down her back and even a shiver of cold all dredged up from memory. The instinctive urge of fight or flight. Why? Because for the first time in centuries, she stared into her mother's eyes and felt like a little girl about to receive a verbal lashing. The courtyard was just as it had been moments before when her presence had been revealed by Naruto. The blonde young man stood behind her at a comfortable distance, looking between mother and daughter with an unsure expression, his usually boundless enthusiasm stymied by the fact that even he didn't know what to say. Across from them stood the veritable peanut gallery of 3 young children, a large red wolf, 2 men and Ranni's own woven shadow. Blade, still wearing his silk dress shirt in the cool summer night air, wore a layered expression upon his lupine maw, black lips pressed into a thin line and lone eye full of resignation. It was almost as if he was trying to tell her that he was sorry about this, but it had to happen. She nearly stomped a foot, such was her embarrassment. Damn him. No, no, compose yourself, Ranni, you're an adult who can face your issues with grace befitting your station. She would not demean herself before these children. The shortest of them, black of hair and blue of eye, lacking any visible footwear, surveyed the building altercation with keen eyes. And was she seeing things, or did Ranni spy a trace of wry amusement on the girl's cherubic face? Little rotter. The tallest of the trio, who, now that she looked at her, bore a strong resemblance to Melania in her youth, looked unsure of what to do, seemingly sinking into the side of her father's wolf to avoid the awkward situation, while the third of the group, a magenta-haired girl with a sealed eye, pouted at her and crossed her arms over her little chest. This was all to say Ranni was avoiding the real cause of her feelings. Rennala, the full moon queen of Caria, and her mother, stood before her, the light chill on the wind rustling the maroon evening gown she had clad herself in, her sparkling blue eyes boring deeply into Ranni's own astral orb. How she wished her other eye was unsealed in this moment. It would have made things so much easier. Because she didn't know where to look. Mother, she forced the word out, her voice level yet bearing an awkward edge, desperately trying to right her frantically spinning mind. A beat of silence passed between them, no visible sign that she had heard Ranni speak. In point of fact, the only visible sign that her mother was not a statue was the light flexing of her fingers, an unconscious reaction being viciously fought against with a stony visage. The Dark Moon Princess was hard-pressed to answer if that urge was to throw her arms around her in a hug or to throttle her. Ranni, Rennala finally spoke, a frosty edge clinging to her tone. Her eyes were full of a chaotic swirl of emotions, an Ouroboros of passion and ennui ever biting its own tail to elucidate cohesive thought that was not one with hysteria. You've come home, I see, though a skulker in the shadows I thought you not, Dark Moon epithet notwithstanding. It is a jot rude to not announce your arrival, she finished gracefully, crossing her arms under her chest, the tendons in her swan-like neck poised as her fingers continued to twitch. Then again, it seems that what I conceived of your character was far off the mark. What an amusing oversight, she chuckled mirthlessly. Ranni shifted uncomfortably. She didn't like that sound, it was so cold coming from one from whom she had only ever known warmth. Inclining her head till the brim of her hat obscured her face, Ranni apologized. Forgive mine lack of decorum, mother. I simply wished to ascertain the company you keep. The company I keep. Interesting turn of phrase from one I haven't seen in centuries. Rennala's laconic response sent a stab of existential pain through Ranni's non-existent heart, gladdened that her hat obscured her face from being seen. While this was but an exchange of niceties, the truth of the matter was that the tension in the courtyard could be cut with a knife, and Ranni was slowly losing her battle between putting up a strong front and turning tail to run for the hills. The wind rustled the grass beneath them as Ranni met her mother's gaze once again, curiosity prompting her to act. My survival does not seem to surprise you. Rennala sharply exhaled from her nose, the ladylike equivalent of a snort of derision, turning half-profile in the direction of her shadow. Blade's survival is quite telling, and even in silence, the guilt he radiates in my presence was enough to make me suspicious that my foolish daughter yet lived. In a manner of speaking, the last words were all but a hushed hiss through gritted teeth. Mother. Rennala's finger twitching grew more sporadic. Ranni winced. She knew she must choose her words well here. Her mother's ire was slow to rise, but when it did boil over, very little could stop it. While she wanted to speak with her mother, it would be impossible should the fury of the full moon queen drive her to her own long-held baggage rearing its head. Steeling herself, Ranni's astral projection turned away from her mother and strode towards Blade with purpose. It's clear that my presence, for tonight at least, is not welcome a jot, so I think I shall simply take Blade and be on my way. The younger Carrion words were cut off as a sharpened glintstone spike buried itself between her and Blade, a foot of the sparkling crystal poking from the virgin earth. Looking over her shoulder, she beheld the familiar sight of her mother's catalyst held firmly in one hand, a trail of blue-white particles tracing through the air from its bejeweled tip. "I think not," Rennala exclaimed, voice glacial. "Thou shalt not flee, not from me. You cannot stop me, mother." Naruto finally took a step forwards, adding his voice to the back and forth. All right, how about we calm this all down? Rennala, I know I don't know everything about what's going on here, but at least. Naruto, love, she cut him off, looking at the blonde for the first time and her stormy visage cracking, revealing a pained warmth that served to make Ranni's gut twist. You have been good to me and brought light back into mine life after so long in darkness. But this once and only this once, I must ask thee to curb the tongue, this is something I need to do. Her eyes shimmered with emotion, please. Trust me. He froze, unsure of what to say before finally nodding in assent and moving to join the trio of children and give the mother and daughter some space. In an ideal world, Ranni would have taken the opportunity for what it was, a breather to get her thoughts in order. Sadly, something about her mother's words rankled inside her, and she spoke before she could stop herself. You wouldst find fault with me when you besmirch father by having affections for this vagabonded buffoon. She spat before her eye widened, two of her 4 hands flying to her mouth. Rennala's pupils narrowed to slits, her narrow face splitting into a furious scowl. How dare you speak to me like that after everything that hath happened? Hath the little culver's pure white wings become sooted in her time away? That body may be a dull mockery of thy teacher, but surely thy soul still holds some measure of sense and politeness, or did you also give that up on the night of black knives? Ranni bristled while Blade gestured for everyone else to get to a safe distance, recognizing the signs that his ward's anger was on the rise. Radagon's wolf picked up the trio of girls and bolted for the wall, followed closely by Old Moongram and Boggart. Only Naruto and Blade remained close to their own partners. They say that seeing is believing, but I struggle to believe what mine eyes show me now. Her staff slammed down, drawing a flinch from Ranni. Where is the daughter I brought into the world, whose brilliance and cunning were the world to me? What stands before me is a mirage of poorly thought-out plans and idiocy lest you prove me wrong. Ranni's projection sighed in exasperation, masking the hurt she felt at her mother's words. Enough of this, I shall speak with thee all another day when your temper is leveled. Farewell, mother, seek me out at my rise, Blade knows the way. Her piece thus said, her form began to fade into motes of blue sorcery as she cancelled her thought projection, seeking to end the conversation now and deal with the repercussions later. Do not run away, Ranni. Rennala called, steel in her words and fire in her eyes, you shall not slip into the moonless night so easily again. The full moon queen snapped her fingers, and the air became alight with complex patterns that formed into a magic circle that began to rapidly orbit her before encircling Ranni's vanishing thought projection. What, she thought, suddenly aware of a peculiar feeling taking hold of her senses as the rapidly spinning spellcraft circled her. Distant awareness spoke to her of a spectral hook taking hold of her navel, and yanking backwards hard. Her vision briefly dimmed, pressure pushing in from all sides until akin to being forced through a tight tube before lapsing in awareness, thoughts scattering to the wind before with a metaphorical thump, her senses returned. All of them, including the dim awareness of the ground beneath her feet. An astral reconciliation mystery, where before her body had begun to turn translucent as her thought projection broke down into its constituent mana, now she was very much solid, her face set in a mix between an annoyed scowl, panic and incredulous curiosity. She barred my cancelling of the thought projection and used my bound thoughts as an anchor to drag my physical form from the rise to here. Ranni realized, unsure how Rennala had conjured such a complicated spell with seemingly no preparation, until her singular eye locked onto the tips of her mother's previously spasming fingers. A subtle shimmer around the fingertips, perhaps half a millimeter across, far too small to notice but perfect for concealing the esoteric mudras one would need to cast such a sorcery non-verbally. Mother feigned her movements to prepare a trap in case I left prematurely, she finally concluded, almost admiring the subtle diversion. Her mother had lost none of her brilliance. Rennala narrowed her eyes on Ranni, pursing her lips, didst thou think centuries of madness would rob me of the ability to see a thought projection? I began tracing back thy stream of consciousness the moment I laid eyes upon you. She trailed off, her face conflicted, sadness and anger at war with each other, marring her otherwise beautiful face. Oh, little Culver, what have you done to yourself? Taken charge of my fate, mother, Ranni replied with cold fire. She would not apologize for her actions. Naruto gulped from the sidelines. It was clear that things were on the precipice of falling off a cliff, but Shikatsu wanted to respect Renala's decision. "How's this going to work?" he asked eventually, earning himself the angry stares of two Carrion royals. HMPH. HMPH. Both huffed, looking away from him and then back to one another. Rani spoke first, regarding Naruto with an unclear emotion. "It is clear that Mother will not let Blade and I leave in peace, and truly, this talk is long overdue. I believe, as the masses say, we are to have it out." Naruto blinked owlishly, having never heard of such a turn of phrase, though if the audible gulps from Blade, Moongram and Boggart were anything to go by, he could guess what it entailed. "A fight." Renala nodded stiffly before softening to address Naruto, her affection much more visible than Rani's smorgasbord of emotion. "It means that my foolish daughter has returned to her place of learning and wishes to exchange words and satiate my burning questions. As the principal of this institution, I am inclined to say we take this outside." "Agreed." Rani nodded, her face firm while caustic anger and horrid self-hate melded in her heart. She deserved the rage, but she had to make her mother see just what had pushed her as far as she had gone. If that meant enduring a barrage of spellfire, then so be it. The blonde shook his head, doubtless trying his best to make sense of all of this with the fragmentary information he had. He too seemed keenly aware that this was a poisonous wound that needed draining, and he always wanted to see people he cared for helped. He closed his eyes in thought as the pair continued their stare down, and asked slowly, "Is there anything I can do to help?" "Just keep our home and hearth safe, my star," Renala said fondly, causing Rani to positively fume. "Now, little Rani, thou knoweth the place." And so it was that half an hour later, Rani the Witch, Dark Moon Princess and Renala of Caria, Full Moon Queen stood across from one another atop one of Liurnia's namesake lakes, the Academy a dominant feature on the horizon. The sky was dark and moonless, but both women could make each other out perfectly under the ample starlight. For all points of contention, Rani knew she had nothing to fear from her mother. After all, despite being a sorceress on par with a god and full of potent emotions, she doubted their exchange would escalate beyond a play fight to serve as a conduit for their words. "Right. And yet my mother's disappointment burns harsher than any sorcery," she thought, looking over to the distant walls of the academy, just about making out the forms of an audience forming on the wall. Naruto's thicket of spiky gold hair was visible to the naked eye even at this distance. The porcelain-bodied witch watched Naruto form a cross-shaped hand seal and blinked when 6 identical clones of said Uzumaki popped into existence with puffs of smoke before bounding away from the original in different directions. A most curious sorcery, if indeed it was one at all. "What's that vagabond up to?" she wondered aloud. "That vagabond, as you put it, has a name. I would ask that you use it." Renala tapped the bladed tip of her catalyst to the water's surface. "He is special to me." Before Rani had the time to respond to that reminder, a rush of sound drew her attention back to the academy. "Sage art. 6 gold yang formation," Naruto intoned, his voice booming out over the lakes. All at once, 6 thin pillars of gold light lanced into the air, streaking into the sky for nearly 1,000 feet before slitting at their apex. All 6 shafts were linked as one perfect hexagon. Before Rani's eye, she watched a tremendous golden hexagonal barrier take from around the academy, protecting it from any harm. Her antipathy for the blonde interloper aside, Rani could not help but marvel at such a large barrier that had been erected so quickly and in a style of sorcery she did not recognize. In fact, it didn't feel like magic at all. By the moon, what is he? Of topics to discuss, Naruto's curiosity is something we can get to, Renala retorted frostily. Rani squared her 2 sets of shoulders, mana begging to gather at her fingertips. "And where would you desire we start?" Renala's staff tapped down once more and her form was enraptured by an aura of greenish-blue mana, a flame of magic that briefly obscured her appearance from Rani. When it cleared, she felt her non-existent blood run cold. In place of her burgundy evening dress, the statuesque queen donned a tight-fitting though not restrictive, corset of navy blue leather outlined in red piping over a crimson halter-topped tunic. Renala wore a pair of dark riding breeches tucked into low-heeled black riding boots bearing glintstone spurs. The entire ensemble was set off by a midnight blue hooded cloak that trailed just beneath the knee, its lining a sumptuous red. Her hair, once down in a braid, was now done up in a tightly bound bun that set off her pale skin and blue eyes. This was an attire that Rani knew well, for this was what her mother had worn long ago when first teaching her the macrocosm of arcane might and sorcery. Where else but the Night of the Black Knives? And so began the battle. .0.0.0 A rapidly assembled group of spectators had gathered on the high wall of the academy to observe the coming battle. They were soon treated to a spectacle that, had the learning institution been its heyday, would have been a case study. A masterclass in high-level sorcery wielded by two masters, each at the pinnacle of their particular craft. The lake's mirror-like surface reflected a hailstorm of spellfire that volleyed dozens of projectiles at the two figures who skated upon the water as if it were a great ice rink. Rennala, identifiable by her dark clothes, swept her catalyst through the air with a trail of glintstone fractals following its path, forming out into a complex magical circle that leveled a steady rain of projectiles in the direction of her doll-bodied daughter. They varied in kind and purpose. Some physical projectiles were made of glintstone that took on an unrefined boulder appearance, while others were spikes and flails. Moreover, a phalanx of 7 spectral blue-green swords revolved around Rennala's head in a steady locus, shooting forwards towards Ranni with blistering speed that rent the air as they passed. Ranni readily reacted to the spellfire. Her white dress set aflutter as her forearms swept about her to weave counter-sorceries, her magical circles a darker shade of blue than her mother's. Shimmering barriers formed of sparking ethereal dust took form as flashes in the air, intercepting the rain of solid projectiles that shattered against their glassy hearts with sharp cracks. The air was filled with the haunting song of combat, morose and magical like long-rusted evening bells being rung in opposition to one another after too long sitting mothballed. Naruto let out a low whistle in appreciation of the spectacle, the sheathed length of his sword propped up on his lap, Sage's senses telling him more about what was going on than he could simply see through the golden yang barrier he had erected over the perimeter. He wasn't going to lie and say he understood sorcery, frankly in the sessions where he and Rennala studied his great runes, even when she had gone to great lengths to explain the arcane implications to sorcery and what the last Uzumaki could achieve with them, he'd found his eyes growing foggy and lost in the sound of her voice. Or maybe it was just that he found Rennala's interested face so incredibly cute that he'd much rather pay attention to that. Though right now, his face remained marred by a concerned frown, because while he was more than willing to respect Rennala's decision here, he could feel the coil of negative emotions roiling within her. The most prominent was sour anger, a melancholic rage born of long-carved wounds being agitated, its unique scent, telling him that the love that she felt for Ranni made it both better and worse. Then there was twisted catharsis mixed with paradoxical longing, like the building desire one felt to rip a long-fouled thorn from a septic wound, its caustic puss of grief making it all the more hazardous to remove without exciting more significant self-harm. And under all of it, an all-too-familiar feeling. His mood must have been worn on his sleeve because the aged voice of old Moonram broke the silence. "Worry not, Sir Naruto," the chivalrous gentleman said comfortingly, "my queen shall not truly harm Princess Ranni, she cares too much for her to do more than a slap on the wrist. And in the realm of demigods and magic, a grand display of magic can be appropriate for what we mortals would solve by boxing our ears." "You sure?" He winced as another blast of spellfire flashed through the air. "I mean, I know this is a charged topic, but this feels a bit much, doesn't it?" he questioned, looking over the other watchers, a vein jumping in his temple when he saw the reactions of the others. "Don't you think? A bit much." Boggart did his best to cower behind the battlements even with the yang barrier in place, only the eye holes in the blackguard's iron mask poking above the lip of chiseled granite to watch the fire. "This is more than a bit much. This is bloody insane. My mother would have just hit me with a ladle, not summon the damn stars," he exclaimed as two opposing spells collided with one another, detonating in an explosion that sent crescent slashes of differing blue magics in all directions including directly at the academy. "Bollocks," he shouted, diving for cover. No one joined him on the floor as the crescents of energy impacted on the golden barrier and dissipated with barely a shudder to the gold chakra construct. "What on earth is this barrier made of?" Little Selen's voice rose in plaintive inquiry, distracting him yet further. "Its construction is not something I'm familiar with. Are you using those curious doppelganger instead of sigils or anchor points at the corners?" Her attention was clearly divided between the familial spat and fastidiously studying her father's barrier ninjutsu. She held a small journal in her hands, with which she even now scribbled away with a quill as fast as her small hands could muster. Naruto rubbed the back of his head in minor embarrassment. "Oh, this thing. It's my attempt to recreate something an old enemy once used, though he was way taller. I may not understand much sorcery, but I won't sit on my rear, not expanding my arsenal to keep you all safe." A dusting of pink crossed Selen and Millicent's cheeks while Melina puffed up her little chest in pride. Blade nodded slowly. "Aye, friend, you've done what the queen asked you to do and then some. And I appreciate not being on the receiving end of all that ruckus." Rennala launched a concentrated beam of magic at Ranni, to which the smaller woman glided away from, briefly turning invisible. Though heed Moongram's words, they shan't hurt one another physically. Their feelings however, I pity that pride and providence ill coincide in such a venture. You're okay with this? Lupine eye narrowing, Bleed gave Naruto a sideways look. I most certainly am not. What guardian would be happy knowing their charge is about to face damage, emotional and intangible as it is? Naruto quirked an eyebrow and replied quietly, so why aren't you running into the middle of it to pull her out? She made it clear she wanted you to leave with her. The hardness in Blade's eye faded, replaced again by that resigned look as their faces were all lit but a distant geyser of dark blue magic. Naruto's ears perked up, hand tightening around the sheath of Kaiman involuntarily. What was that? He asked the wolf man. Blade shifted in place, his muzzle pulling back in query. I didn't say a thing, he said, causing a trill of discontent to run up Naruto's spine. He was sure he'd heard Blade whisper something. But I suppose, in a way, this is something that could only ever be postponed, never avoided entirely. By hook or crook, Ranni's actions have left their wounds on Renala's heart and mind. In doing so, hurting her mother also hurt Ranni. They need to air their grievances, and doing so with the battle is cathartic. Selen chortled with a smirk, earning her a light cuff around the head from Naruto. Ow, she glowered up at him. What was that for? I was just being honest. Naruto took a deep breath, reviewing this all. I still think it's a bit too much. Have you truly never had a dispute that could only be resolved with words and violence as one? Blade asked sincerely, crossing his arms over his chest. Naruto opened his mouth to respond and found himself summarily was suddenly assaulted by a wave of memories from years past. Smashing his forehead into Gaara before dragging his broken body across a clearing to speak his mind to his brother Jinchuriki. His first battle with Sasuke, sinking his fist into his father's stomach for the injustice of being made a weapon. Slicing Obito along his side as they debated the worth of a dream. The entire day that he and Sasuke beat one another half to death, all to prove once and for all whose ideology would stand. His mouth snapped shut, telling Blade all he needed and then some. Kurama offered a low chortle. He has you there. Not that foreign a concept then, friend. He chuckled lowly, though best keep an eye just in case, who knows what supreme sorceress will unintentionally do when their blood is up. Naruto nodded, then felt his hackles rise, once again hearing a whisper on the wind that he could not place, his trio of girls still silent bar Selen's scratching quill. Shivering slightly before shaking his head, he let a silence fall between them as he continued to watch the battle, watching as Ranni unleashed a small tide of translucent wolves who bore a strong resemblance to the wolf perched to his left. The dogs thundered forwards, churning up the waters as they bonded, the flaming swords clamped in their maws, slashing towards his girlfriend in a squall of non-existent steel. Renala held her catalyst out before her before tapping her wrist against it, causing it to spin in front of her with a growing corona of royal blue light. When the pack was only a few meters away from her, she grabbed the spinning gem-tipped staff, and the blue light was instantaneously drawn into the phalanx of spectral swords above her before, at once, they let fly as greased lightning, surging into the pack. A dozen wolves were pierced at once, but many more continued to run at her, having been missed by the swords. Suddenly, the swords embedded in the lake all radiated thick threads of that same royal blue magical light that struck out at the remaining walls. It crisscrossed between like a masterfully spun spiderweb, the sorcery strands seeking out each and every remaining wolf and tagging them in a fraction of a moment, arresting their momentum and undoing whatever sorcery had held them together. As the wolves faded away without so much as touching the Carrion Queen, they let out a single haunting howl as one, a death knell for those that never truly lived, and one that Radagon's red wolf answered with his own. Radagon. Blade, can I ask you something? You just did, but I'll do my best to answer if it's something I can, the half-wolf answered with a thin veneer of mirth at Naruto's annoyed expression. What's on your mind, friend? I've done my best to avoid touchy subjects when talking to Renala, partly because she was in a bad place. Said word echoed a startled yelp from Ranni as her mother's spell nearly caught her, but also because I had hoped she would tell me by herself eventually. He trailed off, providing pretense for his question, but I'm tired of working with fragments of information because I don't want this, he gestured to the battle, to happen again if I can help it. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what happened with Renala and Ranni? What led to a reunion like this being tainted with anger and hate? It was a loaded question and one that Blade was clearly uneasy to answer. Even old Moongram, usually composed, so unflappable, looked downright ashamed for some reason. Perhaps he, 2. Had wanted to tell him but not wanting to taint his and Renela's relationship with cursed wisdom, for he who increaseth knowledge, increaseth sorrow. That's a complicated question with an answer you might not want to hear, Blade said with a sullen grimace, fixing Naruto with an affirmative look. Are you sure you want to know? Naruto met the wolfman's one-eyed stare, feeling the depth in that loyal orb, and nodded once. Ignorance is bliss, but when has that ever stopped me from sticking my nose into others' business? Blade let his shoulders slump before taking a deep breath, more for confidence than the length of the story he was about to tell. Something told him he wasn't going to like it. He was right. All right, then, well, it began, as they say to children, a long time ago, in a land far from here. Naruto listened to Blade explain long and hard then about how long ago Queen Marika the Eternal, the goddess chosen by the Greater Will to take the Elden Ring, had set out to bring the many desperate kingdoms, baronies, dukedoms and other fiefs into a single theocratic kingdom beneath the Golden Order. And at the head of her seemingly endless armies was the strongest warrior, the wisest general and the greatest tool at her disposal. Radagon, Queen Marika's brother self. Under him, the soldiers of the Eternal were a great millstone, crushing flat the opposition of any who would rise to face her on the continent, from the lowest peasant to the dragon lords of old. And yet, for all the war, all the bloody battles, the bending of reality itself at the behest of an actual divine figure, Radagon of the Golden Order made one mistake. He led his armies into Liurnia and made war with its stewards. The sorcerers of the Carrion lineage and their greatest monarch, Queen Renela of the Full Moon, the greatest sorceress the lands between had ever known. When the armies of Caria and Leyndell had made war, for the first time in ages, the gilded footmen and penitent knights were stopped in their tracks by spellfire and glintstone. Renela and her banners retook and paid back in blood 100-fold for every inch of land that the capital's forces took. For the first time since his sister self, Radagon found himself stalemated by another, a witch who shone with the infinite mystery of the moon and fathomless shine of the stars. They were a match. Radagon's divinely gifted miracles would trade with Renela's masterful sorceries, his strength matched by her summons, for as much light as the Erd-tree could muster, the moon would reflect it back with cool beauty and brutal ferocity. As the hammer of the Erd-tree fell upon Liurnia, the glintstone dagger of the moon would rise to slip between the ribs of a stronger enemy. And yet, for all that anger, violence and talk of manifesting destiny, Radagon and Renela had grown a respect for one another and, later, love. And it was love to succeed where force had failed, an armistice and marriage bringing an end to an age of violence. It wasn't long before the pair had given birth to their first son, General Radon, a demigod of terrifying power perhaps on par with Godfrey the Golden, and from that, the families grew closer, Blade explained, now with a rapt audience. Radagon would give Renela 2 more children, Ranni and finally Rykard. Naruto found his eyes trailing out to the battle raging between mother and daughter, watching the wondrous genius of magical warfare and beauty on the battlefield. Naruto found himself pensively smiling. Radagon, I might not know you, but I can understand. Hey, a rueful smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Seeing such wonder every day for years on end, I'd fall in love as well, just as I already have. There it was, a singular, sincere, internal declaration, one not even noticed by the one who had thought it but true. Full of fire that was small but would burn the very cosmos to its core to be known. Naruto Uzumaki had fallen for Renela of the Full Moon, and he wished to learn all he could to make sure he could continue to see this wonderful creature hewn from rays of moonlight and bands of stellar brilliance smile genuinely again. But Blade wasn't finished. Things were good then, simple, without the mess of politics and prophecy. The golden lineage and Caria's demigods grew closer. Radon grew to be a powerful sorcerer and general of armies, respected him as a bastion of strength, wisdom, power, loyalty and above all, kindness. The half-wolf huffed, a rare commodity in leaders, especially those blessed to be strong. He sounds like a good man, Naruto said wistfully, feeling a note of shamed sadness from Blade. He was, the Wolven assented before shaking his head. Rykard was also honored, for his tact and proficiency at statecraft he was named the Praetor of Mount Gelmir. And Ranni. Moongrim winced, the wolf mewed sadly, and an airburst rattled the barrier from a distant clash. Blade let out a chest-rumbling sigh. It was clear that recounting such ancient history was not pleasant for him. Ranni was named an Empyrean, the reason for which I was created. Empyrean. He'd heard the word said before in passing but had never delved into its meaning, though this time, it was Selen who had chosen to take up the mantle of explanation. An Empyrean, the raven-haired girl began, not looking up from her notebook as she shifted her weight between her feet, as a title given to those demigods born with the capability of ascending to true godhood. Though to the Golden Order, it has a different additional meaning. Those selected by the Fingers and thus the Greater will to one day succeed and replace Marika as the eternal deity of the lands between. A future pre-planned, is no future at all, came a whisper from all directions. Naruto tensed, feeling disquieted. Kurama, did you hear that? Hear what? The mightiest Biju gruffly rebutted. Bah, Melina exclaimed, raising her pudgy fists above her head in challenge. If those Fingers made Mama unhappy, I'll just have to beat him up. Papa will hold him down while I kick him. Laughter broke through the grim call, if only briefly. Lass, that is something I'd love to see, Blade grunted in amusement before pushing on. After that announcement, Queen Marika's approach to her family shifted, and in an attempt to keep a closer eye and hold on her progeny and potential successors, the Carrion demigods were summoned to live in the capital. Blade looked up into the moonless sky and the fog of memory. Everything started to fall apart when Marika banished Godfrey. As Blade continued, no one noticed Selen begin to slip away from the rest of the group and quickly retreat into the bowels of the academy. All save for a certain rotted redhead who followed her pseudo-sister, intrigued as to what could draw her away. 0.0.0.0. Wicked child. I did what I had to do, mother. Ranni called, snapping her fingers to erect a barrier that took the brunt of one of Renala's wide beams. Thou must understand that I knoweth the path that would have been laid out before me, and I found it foul. Her eye widened when she saw it to be a feint. Extending two of her other arms, she erected a pair of glintstone walls to either side of her to intercept metallic stakes that her mother had called up from the submerged lakebed. I know. Fool of a daughter, you know nothing. Renala leapt into the air and hung there, floating gracefully before manifesting a boulder-sized moon that she sent careening down at Ranni. Of what I felt, of how the kingdom mourned and the world came undone, how my heart bled, how it still bleeds for the shattered state thou left the world in. Ranni realized the danger of the moon and quickly acted, skating backwards along the water's surface while extending a hand. She fired a condensed stream of dark blue energy that met the celestial body as it fell, detonating it prematurely. The attack exploded in a tumultuous cacophony of sound, the condensed magical power boiling outwards like a pierced balloon. She was sent rushing backwards over the water, a terrific gale ruffling her hat as she was propelled back by a wall of air pressure and the concussive magic she had released. And what do you know, mother of mine? She righted herself with a snarl, pride smarting. That day, I did what I must to escape my fate. I will not be bound to that thing. Nor shall I ever. All of a sudden, Ranni's intuition screamed at her to move, that danger swept upon her with silent wings. Faster than she could comprehend the warning did she act upon it, throwing up all four of her hands and arranging them in a diamond pattern, their segmented fingers forming the frame for a magical sigil from which emerged a dark blue seven-layered barrier. Not a moment too soon, as Renala came blitzing through the cloud of smoke left over from the prior attack directly at Ranni, the bladed length of her catalyst extended in a thrust. Slamming into the hastily erected barrier with monstrous force, Ranni's eyes widened as the first four layers shattered on contact, the blade piercing the fifth layer before being stopped by the sixth. Renala glowered at her, eyes alight with caustic fury, teeth bared like some maddened dog. Was that why you cast the world into chaos? Your deeds, what befell your brothers, all that stemmed from your actions? She exclaimed forcefully. Anger prickled behind Ranni's eye, aimed at who she did not know yet, but it was the impetus to act. Her fingers moved at inhuman angles, articulation impossible for any not possessing a doll's mechanical hands, rearranging the barrier's formation. Do not judge me, she roared, sending the edges of the barrier backwards to loop around Renala and contain her in a bubble of power before blasting it away from her with a sudden stream of light. The orb containing her mother skipped backwards across the lake like a stone, smashing through the remains of a long-submerged bridge before the queen finally popped the prismatic prism with a torrent of magic. The Greater Will, the Elden Ring, a game of cosmic proportions where all are but pawns dancing to the strings of an outer god that does not understand the world. She slashed a hand through the air, trailing flesh azure fire in her wake. I could not abide it, I did not abide it, I shan't abide it. She screamed as Renala settled upon the water, launching a stream of short-summoned daggers at her mother to prove the point. Never. Renala saw the attack and reoriented her catalyst, manifesting a massive greatsword from it and swinging it in a wide later arc, the flat of the blade sweeping her daughter's projectiles aside. She still glowered at Ranni, though a modicum of approval marked her face, marginally pleased that Ranni was finally backing her words up with action. A wave of the catalyst and a trio of green-blue orbs swirled into being before vanishing and reappearing, dispersed in the air around the battlefield. And yet you chose a foolish, ignorant and inane path to do so. Renala bridled, her teeth grinding against one another. Each of the OBS began to divide into smaller orbs linked by chains of blue lightning until the entire sky was alight with a spider's web of electrical discharges. You died, the queen said, grief overflowing from her words. Rani flinched as if physically struck but dare not stay still for long, preoccupied with dodging the discharges of lightning that she danced between, some landing so close that they scorched her white dress. Lightning would be sent her way from whatever orbs were closest to her, but they had divided so many times that each time she evaded, she put herself in the path of another. My flesh was tainted, she spat back, its ties to that thing hewn into every sinew, a pre-planned fate written in blood. The only way I could escape it was to be rid of my Empyrean flesh. And was that thy only option? Why did thou not cometh to me? Renala wailed, swatting aside a curse of stillness that Rani had planted at her feet. I would never turn you away, never allow the greater will, the fingers or anyone else to condemn you to a fate you did not want. Rani looked down, unconsciously redirecting a bolt of lightning at her mother, because you weren't there, mother. You weren't there. Not by my will, Renala roared in response, absorbing the lightning bolt into the gemmed tip of her staff. Do you think I sat idly by when I was banished from the capital? That I did not care for my children when you were forced to live alongside a woman who tossed her own children into the sewers on the whim of a religion that I fought tooth and nail for years? Rani blinked phantom tears from her eye. No, control yourself. She had done the only option she could have to rid herself of her burden. Yet her mother's words had served to hook onto old memories, grievances from long ago. Liar, she bleated in anger, summoning a colossal globe of fire that she sent flying at Renala, boiling the surface of the water as it passed. Not once did you write to me nor reach out after father became the Elden Lord. Liar, the raven-haired queen's eyes widened in near hysteria. I am the liar. How many layers of misinformation and fudged memories are thy wrapped in? Not a jot of truth in thy words. I never stopped sending you messages. I wrote to you every day, yet my messengers were barred from the capital. Renala slammed her staff into the water, a ring of light expanding from her feet. As one, the globes of lighting fired, arcs of power shooting towards her only to turn and bind Rani's flame mystery in chains of lightning, holding it still. I am many things, Rani, but a liar I am not. This is what I am. The energy of the binding slowly fed into the fireball, swelling it in size and changing it to a shade of cobalt as Renala wrested control of it from Rani. I am she who fell in love with a man who tossed her aside at the whim of a god. I am she who feels her insides boil and tear at the prospect that I am allowed to be happy after so many missteps. I am she who loves her children regardless of what they have become, and yet. Renala stood tall, tears streaming down her cheeks. I am broken, but never a liar. Agony, pain, love, hate, desire. All filled her face, and Rani's own was a mirror as the queen sent the Colossus Cobalt conflagration fly. I am not wrong, but neither is she. Rani realized, seizing hold of the lake. The waters rose up in a tidal wave to meet the firestorm in a rush of steam. But to her astonishment, the fire only seemed to grow stronger the more water she exhumed to douse it. The fire was so hot it was vaporizing the water before stripping the hydrogen, oxygen and magic to feed the fire. Thinking fast as the fire bore down on her, Rani summoned a dome of water around her before transmuting it to glintstone, the solid barrier weathering the tide of flame as it landed before detonating a tower of cobalt-colored flame that could be seen for miles around. Steam covered the lake's surface in a thick fog, obscuring both Rani and Renala from sight for nearly a minute. But they were no longer the only ones on the lake's surface when it eventually abated. Come ye oath-sworn knights of Caria, come ye fallen friends who oppose the Erd-tree, rise as I give thee a moment's joy in battle. Renala intoned as the fog pulled away. Arise ye star-sworn, ye who hath followed the path of the dark moon who yet waits to see an age beyond this, Rani answered, her voice thick with pain. Arrayed on either side of the lake were hundreds of translucent figures, one side faint white while the other were somewhat solid. Memories given form. Behind Renala stood her oath-sworn dragon, before it a vanguard legion of 100 knights of Caria, armed with swords, bows, spears and catalysts, their intangible armors marked with battle scars of a battle near a millennium old. Facing them down was another retinue, hundreds of figures, be they man, beast or even cryptids, the likes of which had long since been thought dead. Those who had given their lives to Rani the witch since the shattering, memories of the dead who yet lived and the living long dead. At some unsaid signal, the two forces advanced, footmen and men at arms swarming forwards under a suppressing loan of arrows and spellfire. They crashed headlong into warriors from the meanest beggar to sorcerers of great repute, geysers of spectral blood filling the air with shards of moonlight. And amidst it all, mother and daughter met spell for a spell, yelling obscenities and niceties simultaneously. And for all her bluster and self-assuredness, Ranni could not keep herself from comprehension, nor the bitter bite of understanding that came with it. She had caused this. Her actions had caused the world to fall to chaos, and her inaction had let her mother fall to madness when all she had ever wanted to do was help. This. It was. All. Her. Fault. 0.0.0.0. Everything was shaking. A shudder of masonry caused a light stream of dust to fall in front of Millicent, the grayish particulates appearing blue by the cobalt light of glintstone lamps hanging from sconces along the wall. It would seem that even with Naruto's barrier in place, the battle outside was fierce enough to be felt even this deep in the academy. The little redhead's gold eyes did their best to adjust to the gloom, navigating the half-light more by sound than sight. It felt as if, at some point in the fog of her scattered memories, perhaps she had once been used to moving without sight. Had she once been blind yet learned to see, or was it something else? She continued her train of thought while ducking behind a marble pillar, peeking out to watch Selin skulk through the halls as quickly and quietly as her little legs could carry her. She bit her lip when another tremor radiated up through her feet. Perhaps she should go back to her father to watch over Renala mother, and make sure she was okay. The newcomer's appearance had indeed been a strange development on an otherwise pleasant evening. The arrival of the long-talked-about yet never-seen Ranni, Renala's apparently dead daughter, to whom she was said to bear a strong resemblance. "I can't see it," Millicent mumbled, taking a curl of her long red hair between her fingers. "Can't see what?" "Eeep." The redhead squealed, nearly jumping out of her skin when the voice spoke from behind her. Wheeling around, she found herself face to face with Selin's amused childish visage, her feathered black hair framing her face and eyes reflecting the glow of the lamps. "Don't sneak up on me," she scolded indignantly, her cheeks dusted with embarrassment. "That's rude." "Oh," the other girl smirked, "that is rich, given you were pursuing me, hoping not to be caught," she said pointedly, finding it amusing at the childish way that the redhead looked at her shoes. But as the little redhead muttered a series of silly excuses for why she had been spying on Selin, the barefoot neophyte gained an enlightened expression as if an idea had just dawned on her. "Actually, I think it's best if you do come with me, there is something that you could help me with." "Me, hey." Selin took Millicent's hand and all but dragged her further into the tunnels, ignoring the little girl's complaints and weak struggles. They continued through the labyrinthine bowels of the structure, dozens if not hundreds of passages that led deeper into the subterranean maze. It made Millicent's head spin as she was sure that some of this geometry was impossible. Tunnels that seemed to double back and intercede on themselves, yet impossible space dictated a new path entirely. "Where are we going?" "The Undercroft is hard to get to, but it will give us access to what we need," Selin answered briskly before approaching a large oaken door barred closed with a giant magical circle. The little sorceress pulled her notebook from a little satchel on her side and quickly flipped through the pages, occasionally tapping specific glyphs and patterns on the magical circle. "Renala and father are occupied, giving us a chance to look into something that benefits all of us." "Benefit?" Millicent queried, raising a red brow. Selin paused in her tapping and looked over her shoulder at Millicent, looking for the right words to say, her usual annoyance or self-satisfied smugness replaced with something that Millicent had never seen on her, though she struggled to find the right word to describe it. "I find Renala insufferable and the blonde betrothed of hers to be fascinating and aggravating all at once, and don't even get me started on Melina." Selin explained all this slowly, looking down at her bare feet, "and yet they offer this home and knowledge to me and the rest of us without qualm. As such, the least I can do for my benefit and the rest of ours is at least take a peek ahead to see what might be coming." Big words. She didn't understand them all, but she got the gist of it. Jumping in place for extra height, the little sorceress slapped her palm into the center of the sigil. A bell-like chime rang forth before the glypha began to unravel itself in spiraling patterns, the double doors slowly swinging open to reveal the Undercroft. Millicent felt her breath hitch in her throat at what she now saw, for it was quite the wonder. The doorway opened into a cavernous room some 50 meters across with a tall vaulted ceiling that disappeared into the gloom and mist above them, though it was not the size that amazed her but the composition. The entire room was made from glintstone, from the perfectly level crystalline floor to the gigantic pillars that ringed the perfectly circular hall, each one chiseled from naturally occurring gem stalagmites into dodecahedral supports that glowed with their own internal light. At the room's center was a convex dais of transparent crystal measuring 5 meters across with a wide stem of white energy flowing through it, but her gold eyes were drawn by something atop the dais. A pyramidal plinth jutted up from the crystal to Millicent's eye level, and a large golden egg sat upon it. "The Great Rune of the Unborn," Millicent realized before a dagger of pain lanced through her mind, the rot squirming within her as the fog of memory lifted for a moment. I am supposed to. Oh father, oh mother. The rot, the will. But the thoughts faded into the darkness of her mind once again, leaving only an unpleasant headache in its wake. She let out a mewl of discontent, shrinking in on herself as uncertainty roused the childish thresholds of experience that came with this body. She did not know. She did not know. All that she knew was something she did not know. Shish, a voice soothed, and a softness quashed the fire of rot in her brain, the gold-eyed girl subconsciously leaning towards the sound and finding a small cool hand brushing through her scarlet tresses. Opening her eyes, she realized that none other than Selin was rubbing her head, once again bearing that expression that Millicent could not find the word for. Thank you. Wordlessly, she was led down the steps into the undercroft and towards the great room, the older acting girl leaving the rotted neophyte on the outskirts of the crystal dais before pulling out a stick of chalk and dropping to her haunches. She watched as her elder sister slowly drew a series of intricate symbols upon the ground around the platform, each strangely simplistic yet drawn with such precision that there must have been great importance that required an infinitesimal margin for error. I don't understand, Millicent exclaimed, drawing an amused chuckle from the barefoot girl. You came down here to just draw symbols in the dark. Sorcery is neither art nor science, but sometimes you must be precise to elucidate what you need. Selin preened anew, briefly looking older than she was. After my last brush with the great rune, Rennala hid it in a place most difficult to find, although I've spent the last few weeks trying to work out just where, and the battle gave me a chance to find it. Are you going to use it? Selin stopped to gawk at her. Are you mad? If I used it again in this state, I'd probably be reborn as an infant. I didn't even want to use it in the first place, it was an accident. Millicent felt her brows rise to her hairline, fixing Selin with a disbelieving stare. Never let it be said the sorceress Selin had anything less than suicidal curiosity, even Millicent had worked that much out. Oh Faye, the feather-haired girl waved her off dismissively. Speak not a word. In this case, I simply wish to use the rune as a conduit for divination, she said before returning to her sigil carving. Divination is an old sorcery, but one with strong ties to Raya Lucaria. Events to be read in the passage of the celestial bodies through the heavens are usually something without a concrete set of details, obfuscated by a lack of medium to interpret it. But mayhap, what if the conduit by which you interpreted the stars was a facet of the universe itself? More big words. Millicent didn't understand these at all, or their meaning. Instead she looked between Selin and the great rune then back again, trying to understand what the barefoot little girl was trying to say. Comprehension finally dawned on her face, eyes widening at the prospect. You could see the future in clarity. Of a kind, it's more accurate to say you see a greater scope of what is going on right now and what might come of it. Well, you could, not so much for me, Selin said, whispering the last part. She tapped the crystal dais and drew Millicent's attention to the stem of energy that ran through it like a forking path. This undercroft is built at the nexus of Liurnia's ley lines. We will draw the energy of the land up into the great rune and use it as a prism to diffuse the information of the cosmos and the land into a tangible form. Then my divination matrix, she tapped her circle of astrological sigils she had drawn, will transform that information into a visual medium that you will be able to perceive. Me, the redhead questioned, shocked by her inclusion. Selin stood, brushing specks of dirt from the clothes. Yes, you. When I originally came down here, I originally wished to confirm the location of the undercroft, but your presence presents an opportunity I can't overlook. My little apprentice, she cooed. Apprentice, the redhead thought. She surprisingly liked how it sounded, another way of bringing this little family closer together. She shook her head and pointed at Selin. Why do I have to look? Why not you? Selin frowned, crossing her arms over her chest and tapping her foot, the patter on the crystal floor sounding rather cute. For all my skill and talent, there are some things that require a certain constitution to do, and while I may one day be able to change my form to a state where I can handle mysteries of this scale, she gained a pained expression, there is the potential that I would become an abomination from it. On the other hand, your body is much stronger than mine, and I think you have been touched by something similar before. So, Millicent, my would-be apprentice, my sister, will you help me look into infinity to see what lies ahead for this family? A heavy silence filled the room as Millicent mulled over the proposal, looking over all the information in her head, and Selin patiently waited for an answer. On the one hand, she should say no, simply return to the surface and go tell her father about this. The worst that could come of that was Selin getting a bump on the head from Naruto and Rennala's parental wrath. On the other, okay, but you have to promise me this. Millicent fixed Selene with an intense stare, her gold eyes seeming to glow in their sockets. Whatever we learn can't hurt our family. Selene was about to make a sarcastic remark but was brought up short when her sister's stare persisted with unnerving intensity. A bead of cold sweat running down her temple. Eventually, she gave nonverbal assent, and the redhead nodded in return. Millicent readied herself as Selene began to speak a hushed incantation, a swirl of magic emerging from between her parted palms that was slowly drawn into the crystal and down into the ley lines. The stream of Selene's magic into the earthen stream of power continued for half a minute with no apparent change. Then it happened. An additional fork from the ley line began to detach from the nexus and slowly be drawn upwards through the convex dais and into the plinth where the great rune sat. It ascended slowly, flowing through the plinth in meandering arcs and swaying paths. It was an ethereal set of veins and capillaries that beat with the raw of the earth, a rush of sound permeating the undercroft as it drew closer to the egg-shaped rune. At last, the magic of the ley line touched the great rune. The reaction was instantaneous. A globe of translucent golden light began to expand from the rune, pushing out towards the two girls who stood on two opposite sides of the dais. Fire prickled at the back of Millicent's eyes, and the rot within her bucked against its chains, a wordless howl filling her ears, demanding she grab the rune and make it hers. Unbidden, one hand rose, tiny fingers reaching out to touch the golden sphere. "No, do not touch," Selene barked, positively amusing in her squeaky childlike voice. "Merely look." Flexing her fingers, she redirected her magic to the sigils on the floor that began to light up one by one in sequence. From each arose a band of light that rose to encircle the golden orb and contain it, halting its advance and letting its internal gold light grow thicker. "There, the totality is contained. Now, simply wait for the divination to begin." Across the blue corona of the containment field began to form a series of circling objects of varying shapes and sizes, each bearing its unique symbol, a total representation of the movement of the heavenly bodies rendered in 3 dimensions. Millicent found it hideously complicated, but she did as she had been asked, kept her eyes squarely locked on the center of the orb that grew denser. Selene began to intone an aria, her voice aflutter with excitement. "In the beginning, all matter and energy was as one, a singular point in space and time. From that moment came all. From that time, the cosmos unravels into the present, and from the present, we observe all that is and all that might be. These are the teachings of the stars, the moon that gently breathes the cosmos, light upon the stargazers who walk in the intersection between this day and the next." Eyes narrowing, the child of Ra noticed a change within the sphere, a darkness within its heart that bubbled up like ink through water, becoming a solid kernel of black matter in the heart of the globe. Light seemed to bend and refract around it, a singularity from which no event could be observed. But observe, she did, and no matter how hard Millicent tried to pull her eyes away from the object, she could not. "Biwa," she gasped, a blaze of pain in her brain forcing her to take a step backwards. What is this?" she asked before being rocked by another fire of sensation, the rot squirming under her skin in response. Sweat beaded down her back, quickly rendering her dress sodden, panting desperately as she tried to comprehend just what exactly was occurring. It began as a whisper, an infrasound perceived yet not honestly heard, evolving into a burble of sound like 100,000 voices speaking at once. The sound thundered against her, threatening to swallow her up, even when she covered her ears. "It's too loud. Focus, tune out the chaff," Selene instructed, concern bleeding into her otherwise affirmative tone. Taking deep breaths to steady herself, Millicent attempted to focus on the light-bending object at the heart of the divination orb, and with time the sound slowly bled away to nothing more than a rush of white noise. But no sooner had the last voice faded did images slowly begin to swirl to life in her mind's eye, raw concepts of information bombarding her mind. I can see," Selene gasped, pulling her journal and quill to her hands while using her feet to keep the divination stable. "What do you see?" "Everything. I can see everything," she breathed. She could see Selene standing across from her but also herself in third person. Then it shifted to Naruto and the others on the academy wall, blade hunched over the blonde while Boggart sprinted in the direction of the kitchens, screaming about smelling salts. She could see her mother and Rani locked in a pitched battle, screaming themselves hoarses, tears streaming down their faces. One raged at the injustice of being left to madness when it could have been helped, while the other justified her actions despite still hating herself for driving her mother to such a state. As her perception expanded, awareness of what was and what had been swept aside the fog of her memories. She could see it, the cathedral, the searing excoriation, kneeling to the greater will and promising as she had in exchange for escaping the rot. She remembered it all. "Ah," she exclaimed, the vision changing, the images shifting to a series of things she could not explain. What do you see, Millicent? What do you see? Selin pressed. I see. Her lips quivered as a sob threatened to burst free. She bit down on it. I see. A knight, their bow caught between glintstone and unalloyed gold. I see an omen deep beneath the earth, raining blood and affection unrequited. I see. A peg-legged hunter stalking the Altus Plateau. Oh my. The images dissolved, reforming into an abstract image, the brace of a great tree moldering in the wind. 5 buds from within the tree's bark emerged, thick with veins in a familiar shade of scarlet. Slowly each one bloomed, their flowers dreadfully beautiful, belching plumes of rot into the air, filling the space with a horrid sound from her memories, a twisted song. One watches us from far away, said the smallest flower, thorned and weeping with rot. The eyes are familiar, the body is not, but so far away. Said the next. We know this gaze, the one who ran away, the traitor, the sister no longer. Spat the third. Patience, sisters, we shall find the lost one and make her rot once more, the penultimate flower bristled. For by our putrid luster combined, our rotting mother shall bloom yet again. At last, did the final flower, more significant than any of the others, begin to open at the foot of the tree, yet no stamens or stigmas filled the petals. Nay, instead, hidden in the flower's heart was a woman adorned with a winged helm and prosthetic limbs. Away, she had to look away. She could not let herself be perceived. Away. She cast her mind far away from the rotted blooms, far from the past and present and into the distant future. Her eyes filled with a nebula of perfectly arrayed golden stars, and beyond them, she saw. Millicent screamed. It was an awful sound, high and reedy, it echoed off the walls and through the bowels of Raya Lucaria with a singular, unbroken note of abject horror at what she saw. Ah! Millicent! Selin shouted in concern, quickly willing the spell to be cancelled, but alas, it had become self-sustaining. She ran her hands through her hair before coming to a simple, much more straightforward solution. With a yell of exertion, the little girl sprinted towards the wailing redhead and tackled her to the ground, cradling her against her in a vain attempt to beat the horrid future away. Then something peculiar happened. All at once, the light from the globe seemed to reverse itself, dispelling the black void and retreating into the great rune before being sucked right back into the ley line and away. Around them, the entire undercroft shook terribly. The shaking continued for half a minute before, finally, silence returned, only broken by the scared sobs of a little girl. Selin did her best to comfort the little girl as she bawled. Just what could she have seen? Then, Selin caught, leaning towards Millicent while rubbing soothing circles into her back. She began to slowly calm down as the adrenaline drained out of her, muttering the same 5 words over and over again before falling asleep. A helix reaching towards heaven. Opening parenthesis ... 20 minutes earlier. As the swaths of conjured forces tore strips of spectral flesh from one another on the field of battle, Naruto felt the vein in his forehead throbbing dangerously close to the start of a migraine. I know she means a lot to Renola, but I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Ranni's plan was fucking stupid, he said plainly, causing Blaive to physically cringe. Well, with the benefit of hindsight, the Wolfman tried to rationalize. Hindsight, he scoffed. Even with hindsight, it's a stupid plan, and this is coming from the font of all stupid plans. Take this from someone who has been flying by the seat of my pants for most of my life. The way Ranni handled the problem was not the right way, and even if Godwin hadn't been offed, it still wouldn't have ended well. And how do you figure that, friend? Blaive questioned, flinching when Renola's Oathsworn dragon bounced off the barrier after being sent there by one of Ranni's more powerful spells. No one could have predicted the shattering. Where do I start? Running his hands through his thicket of spiky hair, Naruto launched into his scathing deconstruction. If everything had gone to plan, then just Ranni's physical body died to free her of the hold that the greater shitbag held over it, then you have the only non-golden Empyrean suddenly murdered by a group of women with strong ties to Marika. Stop me if that doesn't sound like a plan to instead secure your own lineage and kill competitors. Blaive mulled over the words but shook his head. True, though Radagon and Marika are brother and sister selves, the same soul in 2 bodies. And who, outside of us, knows that? Naruto replied with an expectant look. Blaive suddenly looked a little sheepish, but Moonbrim was there to fill in for him. Not many, and had only Princess Ranni perished, false as it was, a civil war between Caria and Lyandel would likely have begun anew, but far fiercer. The prospect of grief enraged Renola joined by Radon and Rykard leading a full-blown civil war against Marika and Radagon, was a prospect nearly as horrifying as the shattering had been. Exactly, Naruto shook his head, exasperation and worry in his heart as he watched mother and daughter make battle with one another. He could feel her, he could feel both of them. Their anger, their pain, it was a fire that burned him, and still, he could not help but call this a tragedy. Accidents, mistakes and unforeseen consequences all had come together to make both parties suffer. Indeed, a tragic twist of fate. There it was again. Who the hell is speaking? Naruto internally bleated. Kurama raised the mental equivalent of an eyebrow. I didn't hear a damn thing. Shouldn't you be focusing on your girlfriend and soon-to-be stepdaughter rather than phantom voices? With me, you'd think you would be used to voices in your head by now. His surly observation hardly helped Naruto's mood. At his wit's end, expanded his senses but could find nothing particularly out of place save for the feeling of Selen and Millicent under the academy, and they couldn't get up to too much trouble, could they? Twitching fingers unconsciously closed around the hilt of Kaiman, still crossed over his lap. Blade noticed the twitch and regarded the Odachi idly, seeking to change the subject. Funny-looking blade you got there, friend. Not the first blade like it I've seen. A fair few samurai wander the lands between, but I've never seen one with a blade that long or so. Disquieting. He gestured to the flower-shaped hilt, referring to its uniquely unpleasant feeling. Oh, Kaiman, he replied, lifting the bandage-covered sheath a little higher. Yeah, Renala gave it to me. It was helpful against Godric and, he blushed, she told me that it's an old Karyon tradition between a man and a woman. Blade looked at Naruto with a blank expression before he began to shake, a shudder rippling through his shoulders that was mirrored by Moongram. Each began to slowly chuckle, then with time, it grew to be a laugh until both broke down into a peal of gut-busting laughter. Blade rocked back on his haunches while old Moongram doubled over and held his sides. Naruto and Melina stared at the two with deadpan expressions before Naruto lifted the extensive length of Kaiman's sheathed form and summarily bonked both on the head with it. Knock it off. Yeah, don't make fun of Mama's gift to Papa. Melina chipped in, glowering with all the heat of a watercress sandwich. Which is to say, adorable. Oof, sorry, friend, didn't mean to laugh so hard, but I think you lack some context. Blade chortled, calming his laughter. When the Queen of Caria gives a sword to a man, it's not just a sign of courting. It's a symbol of engagement. Well, damn, Naruto said glibly, genuinely surprised. Bogart snickered and pointed out at the raging battle. Oh, you bastard, you've got that to look forward to on your wedding night. I hope you can regrow blasted off limbs. Papa and Mama are getting married. Melina squealed, setting off another peal of laughs amongst the men and Wolf, but they turned solemn when another explosion from the battle rocked the barrier. Naruto's ears perked up, the whispers on the wind getting stronger now. He looked around before feeling a familiar sensation of cold prickle up his arm from his hand. Looking down, he realized that the feeling was coming from Kaiman's handle, and the longer he looked at the sheathed sword, the stronger the whispers grew until he gently popped the first inch of the black blade from its sheath. He looked down at the cool black sword, and the rest of the world seemed to fall away. Sound bled into nothing but whispers, except it was not whispers, he realized, it was the running of a river. The Hammond lines began to move upon the metal, jostling and shifting like mist rising from water, drawing Naruto ever closer to the heart of the dark. Blade straightened, his lone eye seeing Rani and smiled bittersweetly. A wedding sounds good after so long in darkness, and Rani needs some light in her life, though I'm not sure how she'll take to having a stepfather. He looked back at Naruto, only for the blonde to remain gone silent, hunched over the partially drawn blade. Friend, Blade asked, jostling Naruto lightly, only for him to remain hunched. He pulled the young man up to look at his face, finding his eyes fogged and a stream of saliva running from the corner of his mouth. What's wrong? All gathered around and attempted to rouse the blonde, but nothing they could do would wake him from his fugue state. As Bogart ran off in the direction of the kitchens in search of some smelling salts, none noticed that Naruto's hand had never once left Kaiman, nor the dull black light it emitted. 0.0.0.0. Naruto did not know how he came to be in his current location, but he could say for sure that it wasn't where he had been. A few keen factors clued him into this fact. The most guttural had been internal. One moment he had been looking at Kaiman, then he'd felt a sharp tug at the back of his consciousness that was akin to whenever Kurama had pulled him into speak prior to them becoming true partners, a forceful yank rather than a gentle nudge. The second was the local itself. Gone was the high wall of Raya Lucaria and his 6 gold yang barrier, replaced instead by a foggy plain surrounded by pitch darkness and the sound of running water. In short, probably not on this plane. Thankfully, he was a dab hand at such experiences at this point and knew that little would be gained by standing still. He swept the foggy local with his gaze before setting off at a sedate pace toward the running water's source. He did not have to walk long, passing through a bank of fog to arrive on the side of a fast-flowing river ringed on both sides by red and white spider lilies that nodded in a non-existent breeze. The sight caused him to shiver. There was something wrong about this place, but not in the same way that Godric's grafted had set him on edge. They had felt like something profoundly unnatural, a perversion of nature. On the other hand, this place felt like it was part of nature, yet a setting he was not supposed to be. And yet he had been called here. Curious. Cupping his mouth, he called out, "Hello. Anyone there?" His voice echoed endlessly beyond the river's far shore into eternity. "There's little need to shout, you could whisper, and I'd hear you." An aged voice spoke from Naruto's left, "Though you're correct to meet such a place with a raised voice. While those of your ilk should face it with reverence, a loud voice does liven up a dull end." Naruto whirled around and spotted the one who had spoken, taking notice of a figure that sat not 20 feet from him. Slowly approaching, Naruto took in his appearance. He was an elderly gentleman seated in seiza, his form thin with age but still decently muscled, a build that spoke of a person who had spent a long life fighting. He wore a pair of pale blue hakama and a matching tattered haori. Perhaps most strikingly was the black and gold kabuto helmet perched atop his head, hiding his face from view. As Naruto drew closer, the man, who was exceptionally tall even when seated, turned to greet him, revealing a drawn face, wizened by age and scarred by battle, a long scar having cost him an eye. He did not know this man. He had never met him before, he was sure of it, and yet he was inexplicably overcome with a sense of familiarity looking at him. Naruto Uzumaki, the man greeted simply before returning to his task, lifting a sword before his eyes to inspect it before continuing to slowly clean its black length. "Kaiman," Naruto blurted out, suddenly finding an identical sword in his own hand. "Indeed," the old man mused, his wrinkled lips cracking into the ghost of a smile. "I believe that is still the name of the blade you carry, lest you choose a new one for it, though Kaiman is both fitting and elegant." He silently continued to clean his own version of Kaiman, fastidiously going over every inch of the blade for imperfections and cleaning them where they were found. Naruto frowned before sitting beside the old man, remaining silent while he scrutinized every inch of him, from the tips of his straw sandals to the calluses on his fingertips. "Something on your mind, Naruto Uzumaki?" the old man asked, rubbing down the hamon of his kaiman while Naruto's own sat in the grass. "I don't know you," Naruto began, his eyes narrowed in suspicion, "but for some reason, it feels like we've met before, but you can't remember." The man let out a crackly chuckle, "I haven't met you, but you know me." Another chuckle, "You know me very well." Well, if that wasn't a riddle to end all Ritas. "Who are you?" he finally asked. His words brought an end to the old man's endless cleaning. "I am not truly someone, it is difficult to put it into words, but it is fitting enough. I am a stranger that everyone meets at least once." The stranger sheathing his kaiman and laid it in front of him next to Naruto's own. "As for my presence, I was roused by the sensation of that transient spirit inhabiting the body of a doll, one who has crossed the river yet returned from the other side." Things began to click together in Naruto's head, pieces falling into place as he slowly began to work out what was going on. "You're Kaiman, aren't you? You're the one who's been trying to speak to me." The stranger hummed in thought, cocking his head to the side, "Am I Kaiman? I don't exactly look like a sword, do I? Though I am not sure if it's a compliment or an insult." He chuckled again, then inclined his head to look across the river into the swirling mists beyond. "I am an aberration, a combination of the lingering thoughts of this blade's former wielder, a new veneration given by the being wielded by you, a bearer of runes, and the nature of this blade, a variation of something hidden and missing from this world. When the Elden Ring was shattered, the laws of the world were scattered, lost, metaphysical facets of reality and the world lost. Common sense and reality itself is not as it should be. There is so much out of place." Renola had once said something similar to him. A stranger that everyone meets at least once. Naruto recalled what the stranger had called himself, taking in the local and the feeling of familiarity he got with his presence, the cold and odd feeling he got when he wielded kaiman. It reminded him of something old, long past. Beyond memory, birth. His eyes flicked up. A horned white specter loomed over him, its skin a deathly pallor, two figures skewered on a claw, a tanto swung downwards, the coldness of death. Ice shot down his spine. "Death, your death." "Of a sort," the stranger confirmed, pleased that he no longer needed to be coy. "Don't expect this to be a common occurrence. I will not be a voice in your ear like the fox, nor will I call you to speak in the future. At this point I myself am still trying to work out what, exactly, I am. And yet here I am, called to speak with you. Naruto snarked, earning a reluctantly gladdened side-eye from said stranger. Seems a little backwards if you ask me. Then, to avoid such a contradiction, I shall speak, and you shall listen. Then, we can part ways as we both have errands to attend to. This world, there is much out of place, broken, on this plane of existence and the next. The dead come walking back into life by the grace of a goddess, yet there is no rest for those who truly pass on. The gate swings open in the wind to allow passage through the valley across the river. You hold an important object in such a world. Naruto fingered Kaiman lightly, the cool feeling it gave off now strangely comforting. That blade is more than it seems. You must understand the magnitude of what you hold, and you will have to find out its quirks for yourself, for it is Kaiman, the open gate. Think on these words, Naruto Uzumaki, carve them into your soul, so that next time we meet, it is not to take you across the river, lest there be nothing waiting for you on the other side. Wait, what? Naruto blinked owlishly, drawing a sigh from the stranger. He made to ask another question before feeling a pulse of power through his body, the great runes carved into his body resonating and his form covered in gold light. Seems you are being called away, Naruto Uzumaki. The stranger grimaced a thin rictus. Think on my words, for the broken world needs some level of sense restored to it. In an instant his body was subsumed by a pillar of golden light. He vanished, leaving the stranger alone at the riverside, with nothing but the spider lilies nodding to an unfelt wind. 0.0.0.0. The last two summons clashed. They strove against one another, their bodies barely holding together from the amount of damage they had taken. Over the long, grueling battle between endless conjured-up forces, only a handful remained, the rest having faded into ethereal motes of magic after the sorceries that held them together had run their course. The last oath-sworn Carrion Knight thrust its longsword into the solar plexus of its last spectral opponent. It nodded once in a simulacrum of contentedness before fading away, its job done. Renola and Rani continued to trade spellfire, a myriad of sorceries from a range of schools. Glintstone, Golden Sea, summons, energy projectiles, spatial freezes and transmutations of the element. So fierce had the battle between royals grown that the surface of the lake, once a still mirror to the moonless night above, was a churning mess, illuminated from below by small hillocks of residue magic that had sunk to the murky depth below. Any fish unlucky enough to have been swimming when the battle had begun now cowered deep within the crags of the lakebed, their limited cognition telling them that there was violence at the top of the food chain, and they best stay hidden until it had passed. Mother and daughter stood across from one another atop the water's surface, each panting lightly as they bobbed up and down from the current and waves their battle had unintentionally created. Though it was not fatigue that pressed the pair to pant, for Rani had no lungs to breathe nor muscles to grow tired, and while Renola was somewhat out of practice in terms of prolonged warfare, she was still fit as a fiddle. No, what bade both to take comforting breaths was the emotional turmoil that was as turbulent as the waters beneath them. Rani's lone blue eye remained locked on Renola's face, sharp stabs of pain jutting into her soul from seeing her beloved mother's beautiful visage so twisted by anger at her. It hurt her in ways that she could not put into words, yet riding as an undercurrent was an odd pang of nostalgia, for the days when still flesh that she had giggled in joy to see her mother teach, wondering what new mystery of the moon would be revealed to her today. Ah, how those days seemed so sweet, so long ago. Where I needed care, not a jot for the machinations of fate. Rani thought, her white dress now well and truly sodden, the inhuman nature of her doll body showing through the material. I wish I could return to those days, even if just to save my mother from the horror I caused to her. 24 bolts of green-blue light streaked through the air, and Rani lifted her arms sluggishly to conjure barriers to keep them at bay. Too late did she see that her actions had been expected, tassels of magic flying from the tails of each bolt that formed into chains that looped around her, pinning her in place. A cheap trick, she spat, though the truth was far less dignified. For all the centuries that she had honed her magical prowess, there was a singular inescapable fact that in escaping her fate, she had been bound to. Her body, her real body long abandoned, had taken with it a large portion of her power. While it was correct to say she was one of the most powerful magical sorceresses in the land, a prolonged battle was not her forte. She would likely have to rest for weeks after this, restoring her magic in silent slumber. Why, mother, she breathed, looking up at her mother, her face full of sadness. Why do we have to do this? Surely there has to be another way. Renola gritted her teeth. Another way. Another way. Now you speak of other ways. 'Twas it not earlier this very battle that you derided me for thinking there were other ways to avoid the night of the black knives. Where were your other ways then, little Culver, when your brothers fell to their own madnesses in a world that you made? Thunder raged in Rani's ears anew, indignation, anger, self-reproach and, above all, fervor was afire in her heart. An aura of pure magic enveloped her before exploding outwards in a singular cataclysmic blast, shattering the chains that bound her in place. I did not make their fates, Mother. Radon and Rykard chose their own paths. You could have stopped it. You could have sought us out, sent messengers, sent Blaive, an omen. Something. Rennala answered with her own pillar of power before streaking forwards, a spectral longsword forming around her catalyst that she used to swipe at the doll-bodied demigod. I had to stay hidden, at least until the shattering ran its course. And leave me to fall into madness, madness I still feel, that cloys even now at the back of my mind. Rennala tossed her head, eyes flashing in the light. But not again, never again. I shan't ever return to the squalor of madness and loneliness that you imposed by your inaction. Rani's eye stung at the anger in her mother's tone as a part of herself she had long killed returned to life. Guilt. I did not think Father would leave me with nothing to remember him by than a hunk of creation and no more words. Rennala thrust downwards, nicking Rani's dress with her conjured sword. Is it a confession of penitence you expect, daughter of mine? That I should somehow feel bad for returning from mental oblivion to carve out a recreation of the family I lost, to find love again? Well, I do, she cried, lips pulled back and tears streaming down her face. With every passing minute, I wonder what I did to deserve a second chance, that I don't deserve the love I feel, that I should not chain Naruto to a woman so repulsive as I. But I will not go back to what I was before. Rani sniffed, sent reeling by the words. I know you suffered. Suffered. You don't know a thing. You simply act and stand vigil over what you believe to be unsalvageable. You cannot begin to fathom what I went through after the shattering. Her mother's swings grew sloppy, her eyes red with tears. I mourned for your death, Rani. I grieved, but by the time I had regained my senses, the shattering was upon us and the desecration of all I knew had begun. Rani was forced to turn her body to mist as Rennala came at her with an overhead swing, but even she couldn't hide from the pain. I tried to travel to Lindial. Rani froze, shocked at what Rennala had said as she got back to her feet. I would not leave your body to molder in some foreign land. And even in that, I failed. They barred me from the city, kept your body for their own, an item too holy to be given to a foreign witch. My own daughter, they would not give you back to me. Floored, Rani could do nothing but dodge her mother as she continued to rage and cry, centuries of trauma finally coming to a boil. How had she never heard of this? Was it something that had happened when she had still been recovering from shifting to her current form? Stabbing forwards viciously, Rennala slipped on her feet, collapsing to the watery surface and her catalyst falling from her grip. Her hair had come loose from its tight bun, and makeup smeared down her face. She hiccuped in pain, a scratch of absolute emotional overload at the back of her throat. No matter how many times I came, how many times I asked, they would not give you back to me. I came home and wept. I failed to keep Radagon by my side, save you, and save your B brothers. I couldn't even get your body back from that infernal city. And that was just the start. Do you know what they did to your body, Rani? Rani could not respond, rendered mute by the utter emotional breakdown she was witnessing. Rennala balled into an open palm, overcome by the memories. It's still there, Rani. Rotting on that rooftop all these years later. But what they did to it, what drove me mad, was they worshipped it. Red and blue eyes looked around, lost, unseeing her surroundings as she cried. Those feckless devotees of the Golden Order. They enshrined your body. For hundreds of years, the only word any could speak of the lunar princess Rani was from pilgrims traveling to the capital to bow and flagellate themselves before the burnt corpse of my only daughter. Rennala fully dropped to her knees, taking steadying breaths, and yet after all of that, after finding out you yet live, that you let me suffer for centuries. I still love you, she whispered. A dagger pierced Rani's soul. Mother, she choked out. I wish to live a new life, one with my loved ones in it. But there has been so much pain, so much time. And I don't know how to fix it. As Rennala's tears streamed down her face, Rani felt a crushing weight in her chest. The sight of her mother's anguish overwhelmed her, and she couldn't bear to see the pain she had caused any longer. It was a moment of reckoning, a moment of deep introspection for Rani. As she looked at Rennala, Rani's mind was flooded with memories of those early days long before the capital. She did not intend for any of this to happen, and she stood by her decisions to evade her fate. However, she could not deny that she had caused her mother's suffering, which tore at her heart. With a shaky breath, Rani finally found her voice. "I'm sorry, Mother," she whispered, her voice filled with genuine remorse. "Not for what I did, but that it brought you pain, pain that I stood by and watched because. Deep down, I thought that bridge had burned." Rennala glanced up, her eyes filled with tears and a hint of disbelief. She saw her daughter, vulnerable and tearful, and the pain in her eye mirrored her own. "How can I believe you now?" She took a step forward, shaking despite her steeled voice. "I can't change what hath happened in the past," she said, her voice steady despite her emotions. "But I can change what happens now. I won't leave you to suffer alone again. Nor shall I shun what you have built." Rennala hesitated, uncertainty written across her features. But then, a mix of grief and hope flickered in her eyes as she considered the possibility. "Can you bear the weight of all I've endured?" she asked, her voice wavering. Rani nodded, her resolve firm, voice unwavering. "I shall. I'll take it all, every bit of your loneliness and solitude. Throw everything you have at me, and I promise I'll bear it." Rennala closed her eyes momentarily, taking a deep breath to calm herself. Then, with a sense of determination, she picked up her catalyst and got to her feet. An intricate magical circle was birthed at her feet, and she began to slowly rise high into the air, her staff glowing with the power of the full moon. Higher and higher, she rose, a great mass of energy streaming from every pore out into the moonless sky. She looked ethereal, her grief blending with her strength, a portrait of sorrowful majesty. Rani steeled herself, readying her heart and mind for the immense burden she was about to carry. She opened her arms wide as if to embrace the pain that was about to come. There was nothing she wouldn't do to atone for her actions, no sacrifice too great. Rennala slowly span her catalyst in a slow, purposeful arc, her form becoming silhouetted in a magical circle that began to expand behind her, a holographic representation of the full moon and Carrion crest that grew ever larger, gaining concentric rotating sections that continued to grow. The shape of stars, tracing lines upon the heavens. Space, ever intangible, is given form. Within this penumbra, I see the shape of God. Within God, I see Miniself. She intoed, her voice echoing over the plains as a wind began to pick up. Streams of green and blue magic began to streak into the sky, highlighting the myriad stars and nebulae that painted the yawning void of space. Rani's eye nearly bulged from its socket in sheer disbelief of what she was witnessing. Celestial bodies open in wonder, admitting infinite possibility. Possibility dwells within empty space. And within that empty space dwells the Almighty. The bands of teal and turquoise gave way to intricate magical circles that quickly spread across the sky, ranging from ones as small as a pinprick to slowly turning mandalas that were as wide as Raya Lucaria itself. Each one is linked by a filigree of gossamer strands painted in empty space, outlining the heavenly bodies in excruciating detail. To call it a spell was a paltry description, Rani knew, both by its scope and the fact that she knew what this truly was, yet still, it boggled her mind to think her mother possessed this much power even after her fight. One way or another, this would be the final clash of the evening. Both in a struggle for power and ideals. Rennala danced amidst the artificial constellation. This was her masterwork, a spell of such scope and grandeur that it was as synonymous with her as it was the heavens it represented. Deploying an ethereal gear into the motions of the heavenly bodies and transforming that motion into magic, magic that she shaped into a microcosm recreation of the stars that would unleash a deluge of starfallen matter with such tempestuous power that it could fell the armies of a god. After all, it already had, long ago. This is the spell, the one Mother used on the 12th day of the 6th month of the war against Father, that utterly annihilated the armies of Radagon and gave the unstoppable servant of the Golden Order his first defeat. Rani thought, "Oh Mother, you are amazing. Stars that govern the Carrion lineage. Cosmos is an orrery of causality. Follow the path where we stand beyond the gods. Become the animus of my heaven-sent deluge." Rennala continued the aria, coming to a stop, holding off on the last line to meet her daughter's gaze, a singular white dot in the mirrored lake below. Rani pondered what must have gone through her mother's mind at that moment, for there was still pain in those beautiful blue eyes. Her focus flickered to the golden barrier protecting the academy, and a prickle of curiosity touched her. Just what sort of a man was this, Naruto Uzumaki, whom her mother trusted to defend their home? Perhaps she would find out. But there was the matter of the microcosm floating high above her. In a sense, this great ritual was a testament to Rennala herself, all she had done, all she had experienced, the start of her pain and its culmination. This was the weight that Rani would have to support if she hoped to mend the damage she had done, to walk with her mother, not away from it. She dropped to her haunches and slowly splayed her flower hands until the tips of each of her fingers touched the water's surface. Slowly, ever so slowly, The water beneath her stilled as she pushed her magic into the lake, a much simpler magic begging to take form, though of a similar scale. Rani was a masterful witch, truly, her knowledge and skill rivaled her mother, but since the loss of her body had lost their raw potency. Now had she her ring, things would be different, but still, her answer to the attack had to be as much a statement